There are things you see in this job that stay with you, but what happened during the Morrison viewing changed something in me I can't quite name. My name is Cora, and I've been an embalmer for 11 years. I work at Riverside Funeral Home in a quiet suburb where most deaths are expected, most families are grateful, and most of my work goes unnoticed, which is exactly how it should be. I take pride in my work. When a family sees their loved one for the last time, I want them to see peace. I want them to remember the person, not the death. Mrs. Eleanor Morrison came to us on a Tuesday in late September. 73 years old, heart failure, passed quietly in her sleep. Her daughter, Rebecca, made the arrangements. A simple viewing, cremation to follow. Rebecca was composed, methodical, the kind of person who makes lists and checks them twice. She brought a photograph of her mother from 10 years prior, smiling at a beach somewhere, and asked if I could make her look like that. Peaceful, happy, if possible. I did my best work on Eleanor. The embalming went smoothly, no complications. I set her features carefully. A slight upturn to the lips, nothing dramatic, just the ghost of contentment. Her hands folded over her chest, a small silver cross between her fingers that Rebecca had provided. When I finished, I stood back and felt satisfied. Eleanor looked restful, natural, like she was sleeping in on a Sunday morning. The viewing was scheduled for 6 o'clock that evening. I always stay during viewings, standing quietly in the back hallway, available if the family needs anything. Rebecca arrived alone at 5:45, which wasn't unusual. Some people want a few minutes before others arrive. I gave her privacy, watching from the doorway as she approached the casket. She stood there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, perfectly still. Then she reached out and touched her mother's hand. When she left the viewing room, she nodded to me and said, "Thank you." She looks beautiful. The rest of the family arrived shortly after. Maybe 15 people total, quiet conversations, soft crying, the usual rhythms of grief. I checked on them periodically, making sure the temperature was comfortable, the lighting appropriate. Everything seemed normal. It was during one of these checks, around 7:15, that I noticed Eleanor's expression had changed. I stood in the doorway, staring at the casket from across the room, trying to convince myself I was wrong. But I wasn't. The peaceful, slightly smiling expression I'd so carefully set was different now. The corners of her mouth were drawn back further, not in a natural smile, but in something that looked almost like suppressed laughter. Her lips were parted slightly, not much, maybe a quarter inch, but I knew I'd left them gently closed. And her eyes, which I'd painstakingly sealed and positioned, seemed more open somehow, not fully, but enough that I could see a sliver of what was beneath the lids. I felt my stomach drop. In 11 years, I'd never had this happen. Bodies settle, yes. Gases shift, but not like this, not into an expression that looked so deliberately different from the one I'd created. I waited until the family had moved to the adjacent room for coffee, then approached the casket. Up close, it was worse. The change was undeniable. Eleanor looked like she was trying not to laugh at some private joke. Her face caught in that moment, just before you give in and let the sound out. My hands shook slightly, as I adjusted her expression, working quickly and quietly. I pressed her lips back together, smoothed the muscles around her mouth, repositioned the small pieces of cotton I'd used to give her cheeks shape. It took me maybe 3 minutes. When I stepped back, she looked peaceful again, restful, the way she was supposed to look. I returned to my station in the back hallway, unsettled in a way I couldn't articulate. The viewing ended at 9. I helped the family with some final paperwork, assured them the cremation would be handled with care, and locked the front doors. Then I returned to the viewing room to prepare Eleanor for transport to the crematory the next morning. Her expression had changed again. The suppressed laughter was back, but worse now, more pronounced. Her mouth was open wider, and I could see her teeth, straight and yellowed with age. Her eyes were definitely more visible, the lids pulled back like someone had tried to open them and stopped halfway. I checked the room. All the doors were locked, the windows were sealed, the temperature was stable. No one had been in here but me and the family. I adjusted her face again, this time working more carefully, more deliberately. I added more cotton, used more adhesive, made absolutely certain everything was secure. Then I lowered the casket lid halfway. We'd leave it like that until morning, and left the room. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Eleanor's face, that strange expression of suppressed laughter. At 3 in the morning, I gave up and drove back to the funeral home. We have security cameras in the viewing rooms. It's standard practice, mostly for insurance purposes. I pulled up the footage from that evening and started watching. At 6:12, Rebecca standing alone by the casket. At 7:03, the family gathering, conversations, embraces. At 7:16, me entering the room, me walking to the casket, me adjusting Eleanor's face, me working for 3 minutes, my hands moving carefully around her mouth and eyes. I didn't remember doing that. I scrolled forward. At 8:32, there I was again, approaching the casket during a moment when the family was in the other room, adjusting, smoothing, working on her expression for almost 4 minutes. I had no memory of that either. I scrolled to 9:47 after the family had left. Me entering the room, standing over Eleanor, working on her face for 6 minutes straight, my movements quick and focused. I watched myself on the screen, doing something I couldn't remember doing, and felt a cold weight settle in my chest. The footage showed me leaving the room at 9:53. I watched the empty viewing room for a few more minutes. Nothing moved. The casket stayed still. Eleanor's face, visible in the half-open casket, remained unchanged. The timestamp read 10:37 when I saw my own figure appear in the doorway again, standing perfectly still, just watching the casket. I was sitting in the security office at that timestamp. I've reviewed the footage 40 times since then. Each time, I see myself adjusting Eleanor's face, adjustments I have no memory of making. And each time, at 10:37, I see myself standing in that doorway. Eleanor was cremated the next morning. Her ashes were picked up by Rebecca 3 days later. I haven't told anyone what I saw on that footage. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm working alone in the prep room, I catch my reflection in the metal surfaces and notice my hands are moving, smoothing, adjusting, perfecting, and I don't remember telling them to. I've always been comfortable with silence, which is good because the overnight shift at Riverside Mortuary Facility is about as silent as a job can get. My name is Gene, and I've been the overnight attendant here for 6 years. The work is simple: monitor the cooler units, maintain the logbook, accept any after hours deliveries, and make sure nothing goes wrong with the bodies in our care. We have capacity for 48 drawers, each one a stainless steel cabinet set into the wall, temperature controlled, humidity monitored. During my shift, 11 at night to 7 in the morning, I'm usually alone with anywhere from 15 to 30 deceased, depending on the week. Most people assume this would be frightening work, but it's not. The dead are just dead. They don't move, don't speak, don't cause problems. It's the living who make trouble, the drunk drivers I occasionally have to turn away, the families who show up at 3 in the morning demanding to see their loved one. The dead are peaceful, respectful in their way. Drawer 447 has been empty for 2 weeks now, and I'm starting to think something's wrong with it. It started on a Monday morning near the end of my shift. I was doing my final walkthrough before the day staff arrived, checking each drawer's external readout to make sure temperatures were stable. Everything was fine until I reached 447. The temperature was perfect, a steady 38 degrees Fahrenheit, but there was condensation on the viewing window. The viewing window is a small rectangular panel of thick glass set into each drawer door. It's there so we can verify which body is in which drawer without having to open them unnecessarily. Most of the time, these windows are clear or have a light fog from the temperature differential. But the condensation on 447 was different. It was shaped like a handprint, not vaguely hand-shaped, an actual handprint, 5 distinct fingers pressed against the inside of the glass as if someone had placed their palm flat against it. The print was small, delicate, a child's hand maybe, or a small woman's. I stared at it for a long moment, then checked the logbook. Drawer 447 had been empty since the previous Tuesday when we'd released a body to the Johnson Funeral Home. Before that, it had held a 74-year-old man named Richard Dominguez for 3 days. Before him, the records went back months, all adults, all removed without incident, no children. I wiped the condensation away with my sleeve and made a note in the log. Probably just humidity from the hallway, I told myself. A quirk of the ventilation system. These old coolers can be temperamental. But the next morning, the handprint was back. Same drawer, same size, same position, palm flat against the glass, fingers spread slightly, as if someone was pressing outward, trying to see through. I reported it to my supervisor, Dale, when he came in. He looked at the print, frowned, checked the drawer's mechanical systems, found nothing wrong. Humidity issue, he said. I'll have maintenance take a look. Maintenance came that afternoon. They checked the seals, the temperature controls, the ventilation. Everything was functioning normally. They cleaned the window inside and out, replaced a gasket that showed minor wear, and declared the problem solved. That night, When I arrived for my shift, I went straight to drawer 447. The handprint was there, fresh, distinct, still the size of a child's hand. I opened the drawer. It slid out smoothly, the stainless steel gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Empty, clean. The temperature gauge inside read 38.2 degrees. I ran my hand along the interior surfaces. Cold, dry, nothing unusual. I checked the seals again myself, looking for any gap where moisture might be getting in. Nothing. I closed the drawer and stood there, staring at that handprint on the glass. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I measured it. Using a ruler from the office, I carefully measured the length of the palm, the distance between finger marks, the span from thumb to pinky. 4.3 inches from the base of the palm to the tip of the middle finger. 2.7 inches across the palm. Small, definitely a child's proportions, or possibly a young teenager's. I photographed it with my phone, then wiped it clean. 3 hours later, during my 2 a.m. walkthrough, it was back. I stopped photographing it after the first week. There didn't seem to be a point. The handprint appeared every few hours, always in the same position, always the same size. I started timing it. Roughly every 3 to 4 hours, the condensation would form, coalescing into that same distinctive shape. Dale stopped believing it was a humidity issue after he came in early one morning and saw it himself. He stood there in the hallway, staring at drawer 447, and said, "That's not condensation. That's not normal condensation." We called in a different maintenance crew. They brought specialized equipment, took humidity readings, checked for leaks in the cooling system, even examined the drawer above and below 447. Everything was normal. One technician suggested we swap the drawer unit entirely, pull 447 out, and replace it with a spare. Dale approved it. It took them a full day to make the swap. They removed drawer 447 completely, installed a brand new unit in its place, and moved the old unit to storage. That night, the handprint appeared on the new drawer. Same size, same position, same delicate fingers pressed against the glass, as if someone inside was trying to see out. I started researching the facility's history. Riverside Mortuary has been operating since 1979, serving funeral homes across 3 counties. In 46 years, they've handled thousands of deceased. I went through old logbooks looking for any pattern, any child who might have been stored in drawer 447. I found 3 children in the facility's records who'd been kept in that specific drawer over the decades. The most recent was in 2011, a 9-year-old girl named Sophie Brennan who died in a car accident. Before her, in 2003, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Chen, drowning victim. And in 1994, a 7-year-old girl named Amy Caldwell, house fire. I measured the handprint again and compared it to average hand sizes for children those ages. It matched Sophie's demographic most closely, a 9-year-old girl. Sophie Brennan had been in drawer 447 for 2 days in August of 2011 before being transferred to her funeral service. According to the notes, there had been complications with her viewing, The family had requested an open casket, but the injuries from the accident were too severe. They'd said goodbye through the viewing window instead, through the same window where I now saw her handprint every few hours. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, pattern recognition, my mind making connections that weren't there. But I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie Brennan, 9 years old, looking out through that small window at her family for the last time. I started talking to the drawer, just small things, late at night when no one else was around. "You're okay," I'd say. "Your family said goodbye. They loved you." Stupid things, probably, crazy things, but the handprint kept appearing, and I kept talking, and somehow it felt necessary. Last week, something changed. I was doing my 3 a.m. walkthrough when I noticed the handprint was different. Instead of fingers spread against the glass, they were curled inward, like a wave, like a goodbye, or maybe like a beckoning. The next night, there was a second print beside the first one, larger, adult sized, palm pressed against the glass next to the small one, as if someone was reaching out to hold that child's hand. I haven't told anyone about the second print. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what it means. But every morning when I end my shift, I stop at drawer 447. The handprints are always there, one small, one large, pressed together against the cold glass. And every night when I start my shift, I find them the same way. I used to be comfortable with silence, but now, in the deep hours of the morning, I find myself listening to the hum of the coolers and wondering if there's something else underneath that sound. Something smaller, something that sounds almost like breathing. Drawer 447 has been empty for 2 weeks now, but I don't think we're alone. Every Monday morning, I find white lilies on plot 8G, and every Monday morning, I'm reminded that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. My name is Director Paulson. Most people just call me Paulson, and I've been running Green Hill Cemetery for 19 years. It's a good job mostly, peaceful. The grounds are beautiful, especially in spring when the old oaks are in full bloom. I know every grave, every family, every stone. This place is as much a part of me now as my own home. Plot 8G belongs to Margaret Whitmore, who died in March of 2022 at the age of 67. Breast cancer, I believe. Her service was small, maybe 20 people, and I remember her daughter specifically requesting no lilies. She was very clear about it. No white lilies anywhere near the service or the burial. At the time, I thought it was an unusual request, but not unheard of. Some flowers carry painful associations. It wasn't until later that I learned why. The lilies started appearing that first Monday after the burial. I noticed them during my morning rounds, a fresh bouquet of white stargazer lilies, maybe a dozen stems, arranged in a simple glass vase and placed directly on top of the headstone. Beautiful flowers, professionally arranged. They looked expensive. I assumed they were from a family member who couldn't attend the funeral. It happens often. People feel guilty about missing services, so they send flowers afterward. I made a note to call Margaret's daughter and let her know someone was remembering her mother. When I reached Emily Whitmore on the phone, she was quiet for a long moment. My mother was allergic to lilies, she said finally, severely allergic. Even being in the same room with them would make her throat close up. That's why we requested no lilies at the service. Who would send those? I told her I'd look into it. Maybe the florist had made a mistake. Maybe there'd been a mix-up with another grave. These things happened, but when I checked the cemetery log, there was no record of any flower delivery to plot 8G. No florist invoice, no name, no card, just the lilies themselves sitting pristine and perfect on Margaret Whitmore's grave. I removed them, threw them away in the maintenance shed dumpster. Problem solved, I thought. The next Monday, they were back. Same spot, same flowers, same glass vase, as if I'd never removed them at all. This time, I checked the cemetery's security footage. We have cameras covering the main entrance and the central pathways, mostly to prevent vandalism. I reviewed the footage from Sunday night through Monday morning. No one entered the cemetery after hours. No one approached plot 8G, but at 6:47 Monday morning, between two camera sweeps, the flowers simply appeared. I called Emily again. She came to the cemetery that afternoon, stood at her mother's grave, and stared at the lilies with an expression I couldn't quite read. "This doesn't make sense," she said. "My mother's obituary specifically said no lilies. We made sure it was in print. Everyone knew." I pulled up the obituary on my phone. There it was, in the final paragraph. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the American Cancer Society. Those wishing to send flowers are asked to please avoid lilies, as Margaret was allergic. "Maybe it's someone who didn't read the obituary," I suggested. Emily shook her head. "My mother was violently allergic. One time when I was 16, someone brought lilies to a family gathering. She didn't even touch them. Just being in the room made her break out in hives. Her throat started swelling within minutes. We had to use her EpiPen and call an ambulance. After that, she wouldn't allow lilies anywhere near her. Not in the house, not at restaurants, not at any family event. Everyone who knew her knew about the lilies." She looked at me. "Whoever's leaving these flowers either didn't know my mother at all, or they're doing this deliberately." I increased my morning rounds to include weekends. Every Monday, like clockwork, the lilies appeared. I started arriving earlier, sometimes as early as 5 a.m., to see if I could catch whoever was leaving them. I never did. I tried everything. I moved the vase to my office. It was back on the grave the next Monday. I installed a motion-activated camera pointed directly at plot 8G. The footage showed nothing but an empty grave at 11 p.m. Sunday, then the flowers sitting there at 6:30 Monday morning with no transition in between. I even stayed at the cemetery overnight once, parked in my car with a clear view of Section 8. At 2:37 a.m., I dozed off for maybe 10 minutes. When I woke up, the lilies were there. Emily came back several times over the following months. She'd sit by her mother's grave, remove the lilies, and talk to the headstone quietly. I gave her privacy during these visits, but once I overheard her saying, "I don't know who you are, but please stop. Please." She wouldn't want these. The lilies kept coming. I started researching Margaret Whitmore's life, thinking maybe there was something in her past that would explain this. She'd been a high school English teacher for 34 years, by all accounts beloved by her students. She'd been married once, divorced in her 40s, no drama according to public records. She'd lived quietly, volunteered at the local library, had a small circle of friends. Nothing unusual, nothing that suggested enemies or grudges or mysterious admirers. I talked to the other people buried near Plot 8G, or rather, I talked to their families. Had anyone else noticed unusual flower deliveries, strange occurrences? Everyone said no. It was only Margaret Whitmore's grave. One Monday in September, I arrived at 6 a.m. and found the lilies as usual, but this time there was something different. The flowers were wilting, not old wilting, where petals, brown, and stems droop, but wrong wilting. The petals were curling inward, blackening at the edges, as if they'd been burned or frozen. The smell was off, too, not the usual sweet scent of lilies, but something acrid and bitter. I took photographs, then removed the vase. The flowers were ice cold to the touch, despite the September warmth. When I threw them in the dumpster, they left a dark stain on my gloves that I couldn't wash out for 3 days. The next Monday, the lilies were fresh again. Perfect, as if nothing had happened. Emily stopped visiting after that. She told me over the phone that she couldn't handle it anymore, couldn't keep coming back to see those flowers on her mother's grave. It feels like someone's taunting her, she said. Even in death, they won't leave her alone. I wanted to tell her I'd fix it, that I'd figure out who was doing this and make them stop, but I couldn't. I'd tried everything I could think of, and the lilies kept appearing like clockwork every Monday morning without fail. Then, last month, I was updating our cemetery records and found something I'd missed before. I was reviewing the original plot allocation documents from when Greenhill first opened in 1963, and I noticed that Plot 8G had been used once before Margaret Whitmore. In 1971, a woman named Catherine Wells was buried there. The grave had been exhumed in 1998 at the family's request, something about moving the body to a family plot out of state. Plot 8G had been reused for Margaret in 2022 because the original burial was long gone and the plot had been officially redesignated as available. I pulled Catherine Wells's obituary from the archives. She died at age 34 from an allergic reaction. The obituary didn't specify what she'd been allergic to, but it did mention that she'd loved gardening and had grown lilies in her backyard. Her family requested that mourners bring white lilies to the service. I sat in my office staring at that obituary, feeling something cold settle in my chest. Catherine Wells had loved lilies. She'd grown them, surrounded herself with them, wanted them at her funeral, and then she died from an allergic reaction, though the obituary didn't say to what. Margaret Whitmore had been deathly allergic to lilies, and now she was buried in the same plot where a woman who loved lilies had been laid to rest. I don't remove the flowers anymore. Every Monday, they appear on Plot 8G, and I leave them there. They never wilt now, never fade. They just vanish by Tuesday morning, as if they were never there at all. Emily doesn't visit anymore, and I don't blame her. Some weeks, I'm tempted to have Margaret's body moved to a different plot to escape whatever this is. But something stops me. Maybe it's the realization that moving her wouldn't help. Maybe it's the suspicion that this isn't about the location at all. Last Monday, I arrived at my usual time and found the lilies waiting. But this time, there was something else, a small card tucked between the stems, the kind florists use for messages. The card was blank except for 2 words written in elegant script. I'm sorry. I don't know who wrote it. I don't know if it was meant for Margaret or for Catherine or for someone else entirely, but I kept the card, and it's in my desk drawer now, next to the photographs of the blackened flowers and the security footage that shows nothing. Every Monday, I find white lilies on plot 8G, and every Monday, I wonder who's apologizing and why. There are places in every cemetery that feel different from the rest, and Section K has always been one of those places at Hillside Memorial. My name is Miles, and I've been the head groundskeeper here for 14 years. I know every inch of these grounds, where the soil drains poorly, where the roots from the old elms intrude on burial plots, where the ground settles unevenly and needs attention. Section K is in the northeast corner, backing up against a line of pine trees that shield it from the road. It's one of the older sections, dating back to the cemetery's founding in 1937, and it's always needed more maintenance than the rest. The grass dies back faster there, even in good weather. Sod won't take properly, no matter how many times we try to replant. And there's something about the light in that corner. It's always slightly dimmer, even at noon on cloudless days, as if the shadows from those pines reach further than they should. But we manage it. It's my job to manage it. And in April, when the section needed significant resodding after a harsh winter, I brought in the equipment and got to work. I was 3 hours into the job when the tiller hit something solid. The impact jarred through the machine and up my arms. I killed the engine immediately, knowing that sound, metal on metal, the kind of contact that means you've hit something that shouldn't be there. A water line, maybe, though there weren't supposed to be any utilities in this section. Or a rock, though the soil here was primarily clay. I got down on my hands and knees and started digging by hand, clearing away the loose soil the tiller had churned up. Within minutes, I'd uncovered what I'd hit. A corner of something wooden, rotted and dark with age. My stomach dropped. I knew what I was looking at even before I'd cleared enough soil to be certain. A coffin, a very small coffin, Childesate. I stopped digging and called the office immediately. Our cemetery manager, Patricia, answered on the second ring. I found something in Section K, I said. An unmarked burial, child-sized. It's not on the plot map. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, how far down? 18 inches, maybe less. It's shallow, Patricia, way too shallow. Another silence. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear her mind working through the implications. An unmarked grave meant records missing, A child's grave meant families involved, grief involved. A shallow grave meant someone had buried this child quickly, quietly, without proper depth. Cover it back up, she said finally. I stared at the phone. What? Cover it back up, Miles. Fill in the hole. Move your equipment to Section E, and we'll discuss this later. Patricia, this is a child. Someone's child. We can't just. We'll discuss it later. Her voice was firm, final. Cover it up and move on. She hung up. I stood there in Section K, the exposed corner of that tiny coffin visible at my feet, and felt something I couldn't name. Not quite anger, not quite fear, something in between, something that made my hands shake as I picked up the shovel. I covered it back up, filled in the hole, tamped down the soil, and moved my equipment to Section E like she'd told me. I didn't say anything to the other groundskeepers. I just worked, trying not to think about that small wooden box 18 inches underground, unmarked and forgotten. Patricia called me into her office the next morning. She was sitting at her desk with a stack of old record books open in front of her, the kind we digitized years ago but kept in storage for reference. Section K was the original pauper section, she said without preamble. Between 1937 and 1962, indigent burials were conducted there. People with no family, no money, no resources. The records are incomplete. Many burials weren't properly documented. That was a child's coffin, I said. She nodded. In the 30s and 40s, infant and child mortality was higher. Pauper burials included children who died in orphanages, hospitals, or were simply abandoned. They were buried quickly, often in shallow graves to save costs. We should move it, give it a proper burial. Patricia closed the record books. We'd have to excavate, identify the remains if possible, notify any living relatives if we can find them, obtain permits for exhumation and reburial, and open ourselves up to liability questions about why this grave was unmarked and why we've been maintaining this section for decades without discovering it. The legal complications alone could take years. So we just leave it there. We just leave it there. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her it was wrong, that someone's child deserved better than to be forgotten 18 inches under Section K. But I could see in her face that she'd already made the decision, had probably made it the moment I called her. I went back to work, avoided Section K for the next week, assigned the routine maintenance there to other crew members. But I couldn't stop thinking about that coffin, that small wooden box that had been sitting there for decades, maybe 80 years or more, while we planted grass and trimmed edges and went about our business overhead. Then, 2 weeks after I'd found it, I started hearing the humming. It happened on overcast days, usually in the morning or late afternoon. I'd be working somewhere else in the cemetery, Section C or Section M, or by the maintenance shed, and I'd hear it carried on the wind. A child's voice, humming something that might have been a lullaby, or might have been something else. No words, just that melody, repetitive and slightly off-key. The first time, I thought it was coming from outside the cemetery, maybe a kid in the neighborhood. The second time, I walked toward the sound, trying to pinpoint its source. It led me to Section K. The humming was loudest near where I'd found the coffin. I stood there, listening, trying to convince myself it was wind through the pine trees or some acoustic trick of the landscape. But it didn't sound like wind. It sounded like a child humming the same phrase over and over, the melody drifting up from somewhere beneath my feet. I told myself I was imagining it. Stress, guilt over leaving that coffin where it was, my mind playing tricks. I tried to ignore it, but the humming continued, always on overcast days, always in Section K, always that same melody, patient and persistent, like someone waiting for attention. Last month, I started researching the cemetery's history. I went through the old newspapers archived at the library, looking for any mention of Hillside Memorial between 1937 and 1962. Most of what I found was routine: obituaries, burial announcements, the occasional feature about the cemetery's landscaping. But in a 1942 edition, I found a small article, barely 3 paragraphs, buried on page 7. Local orphanage conducts memorial service. The article mentioned that Eastside Children's Home had held a memorial service for those lost to illness during the harsh winter months. 11 children had died in a flu outbreak between December 1941 and February 1942. The article noted that the children, all under age 7, had been laid to rest at Hillside Memorial in a private service attended by staff and volunteers. No names, no plot numbers, just laid to rest at Hillside Memorial. Section K. I showed the article to Patricia. She read it, handed it back, and said, "That doesn't change anything. We still can't excavate. There might be 11 children buried there," I said, "all unmarked, all forgotten. And there might not be. That article doesn't specify location. It could have been any section." But I knew it was Section K. I could feel it every time I went near that corner of the cemetery, could hear it in the humming that only appeared on overcast days. I started keeping a log. Every time I heard the humming, I'd note the date, time, and weather conditions. Over 2 months, I recorded it 23 times, always overcast, always in Section K, always the same melody. On the last entry, I also noted something else. The humming had changed. Instead of one voice, I heard several, layered over each other, children's voices braiding together in that same repetitive tune. 11 voices, I thought. 11 children who died in 1942 and were buried in an unmarked pauper section where no one remembered them. I tried recording the humming once, pulled out my phone and captured 2 minutes of audio while standing in Section K on an overcast Wednesday morning. When I played it back later, there was nothing, just wind and distant traffic and the rustling of pine branches. But I'd heard it. I knew I'd heard it. Yesterday, I went back to Section K with a can of marking spray, paint. I stood over the spot where I'd found that coffin 2 months ago and painted a small white cross on the grass. Just a simple marker, 4 inches across. Nothing dramatic. Just something to acknowledge that a child was buried there, that someone knew, that someone remembered. The humming stopped after that. I worked the rest of the day in complete silence. No melody carried on the wind, no voices drifting up from Section K. But this morning, when I arrived for my shift, the white cross was gone. The grass where I'd painted it was brown and dead, a small withered patch about 4 inches across, as if something beneath the soil had drawn all the life out of it. And when I knelt down to examine it, I heard, very faintly, a sound from below. Not humming this time, something else, tapping, rhythmic and patient. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. Like small fingers drumming against wood, waiting for someone to answer. I covered my ears and walked away. I've been avoiding Section K all day, staying on the opposite side of the cemetery, keeping busy with work that doesn't require me to go near that northeast corner. But tonight, when I leave, I'll have to walk past it to get to my truck. And tomorrow morning, when I arrive, I'll have to decide whether to tell Patricia what I heard, or whether to get a shovel, return to Section K, and see what else is buried 18 inches down. I don't know which choice frightens me more. I've transported bodies for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen everything until the night I picked up Mr. Howard Chen. My name is Renee, and I drive for Silver State Transport Services. We're the primary contractor for moving deceased individuals between hospitals, funeral homes, and the medical examiner's office across 3 counties. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and it pays well. Most nights, I do 3 to 5 transports, following the same routine each time. Receive the call, arrive at the pickup location, verify the identity, secure the body, get the release signature, and deliver to the destination. The signature is important. For legal purposes, someone has to acknowledge that the body is leaving their facility. Usually it's a nurse supervisor or a funeral director or a medical examiner's assistant. They sign, I sign, we both keep copies. Simple, standard. Mr. Chen's pickup was scheduled for 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday in October. The call came from County General Hospital, elderly male, aged 82, heart failure, no autopsy required, no family present. Destination was Westlake Funeral Home, where the director would handle arrangements the following morning. A routine transport, the kind I'd done hundreds of times. I arrived at County General at 11:38. The hospital was quiet in that late night way hospitals get. The hallways dim and mostly empty except for overnight staff moving efficiently between rooms. I checked in at the nurse's station on the 3rd floor, where they'd told me the body was being held. The nurse on duty, a young woman named Beth, looked exhausted. Room 317, she said, handing me the paperwork. Mr. Chen, no family, no visitors. He went peacefully about 2 hours ago. I reviewed the forms. Everything looked in order. Name, age, time of death documented as 9:22 p.m., cause listed as cardiac arrest. No next of kin information. A note at the bottom indicated he'd been a patient at the hospital for 6 days following a stroke. No visitors during that time. No known relatives. Sad, I said, more to myself than to Beth. No one should die alone. Beth shrugged. Happens more than you'd think. You ready to sign? I nodded, and she signed the release form, her signature tired and barely legible. Then I wheeled my gurney down to room 317. Mr. Chen was a small man, thin and gray haired, his face peaceful in death. I've learned to work efficiently, but respectfully. I transferred him from the bed to the gurney, secured him in the body bag, checked twice that everything was properly sealed. The room was cold, sterile, already stripped of any personal effects. Whatever life Mr. Chen had lived, there was no evidence of it here. I wheeled him to the service elevator, took him down to the basement loading area, and transferred him to my van. The whole process took maybe 20 minutes. By 12:15, I was on the road to Westlake Funeral, home, the city lights sparse at this hour, the highway mostly empty. I always keep the clipboard with the transport forms on the passenger seat. Standard procedure. I need to verify the paperwork when I make the delivery, make sure everything matches, get the receiving signature from the funeral home. But at a red light, about 10 minutes into the drive, I glanced over at the clipboard and noticed something odd. There were two signatures on the release form, Beth's, which I'd watched her sign, and another one below it. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and turned on the dome light. The clipboard sat on the passenger seat, the transport form clipped securely in place. I picked it up and examined it closely. Beth's signature was there, on the line marked Releasing Facility, her handwriting sloppy but clear enough to read her name. But below it, on the line marked Next of Kin Legal Representative, was another signature. Shaky, uncertain, the handwriting of someone very old or very weak. It read, Howard Chen. I stared at it. That line was supposed to be blank. Beth had specifically said no next of kin, no family present. The form should have had only her signature and mine. I checked my own signature on the line marked Transport Service. Still there, right where I'd signed it in the hospital. And now, between Beth's signature and mine, was this third signature in that trembling hand. I must have made a mistake. Maybe there had been a family member present after all, someone I'd missed. Maybe Beth had gotten someone to sign, and I hadn't noticed. I pulled out my phone and called the hospital. Beth answered on the third ring. Third floor nurses station. Beth, it's Renee from Silver State Transport. I picked up Mr. Chen about 20 minutes ago. Quick question. Did someone sign the release form? A family member or representative? No, she said. I told you, no next of kin. Why? The form has a signature on the family line. Howard Chen. Did you write that? A pause. I signed on the facility line. That's it. There was no one else to sign. Could someone have come in after I left? Maybe they wanted to see him and ended up signing something? Renee, you took the body. Who would they sign for? She had a point. I looked at the back of the van, where Mr. Chen's body bag was secured on the gurney. Okay, thanks. Must be a clerical error on my end. I hung up and sat there in the gas station parking lot, staring at that signature. Howard Chen, written in shaky letters that wavered across the line. I pulled out the intake forms from the hospital, the documents Beth had given me, with all of Mr. Chen's information. Found the admission paperwork from 6 days ago when he'd arrived following his stroke. The signature at the bottom of the admission form matched the one on my transport release. Same shaky handwriting, same weak but determined script. Howard Chen had signed my release form. The same Howard Chen who was dead in Olse, a body bag in the back of my van. I felt something cold move through my chest. I wanted to call Beth back, to tell her to check something, anything, to confirm that this wasn't what it looked like. But what would I say? That a dead man had signed paperwork? That I'd somehow missed a living person writing their name while I was staring directly at the form? I started the van and drove to Westlake Funeral Home, the clipboard sitting on the passenger seat, that signature staring up at me every time I glanced over. The funeral home was dark, except for the entrance lights. I pulled around to the service bay and called the overnight number. After 3 rings, Director Marcus answered, his voice thick with sleep. Silver State Transport. I have Mr. Chen. Give me 5 minutes. He arrived in sweats and a jacket, looking exactly like someone who'd been pulled from bed. He helped me wheel the gurney inside, checked the body bag tag against his records, and nodded. Everything look good? Yeah, just need your signature. He signed on the receiving line, his signature neat and professional even at 1 in the morning. He handed the clipboard back to me, and I saw him glance at the form. Next of kin present for release? He asked, pointing to Howard Chen's signature. No, I said. There's no next of kin. He died alone. Marcus looked at the signature, then at me. But someone signed here. I know. Who? I didn't answer, just took the clipboard, made a copy of the form for his records, and left. I drove back to the office, parked in the lot, and sat in my van for 30 minutes, staring at that signature. Howard Chen had been dead for 3 hours when I picked him up. The paperwork was clear. Time of death 9:22 p.m., pronounced by Dr. Patterson, witnessed by 2 nurses, including Beth. There was no question he was deceased when I arrived, but his signature was on my form, in handwriting that matched his hospital admission papers, written on a line that had been blank when Beth signed it, blank when I signed it, and somehow filled in during the 20-minute drive from the hospital to the funeral home. I started researching, found an obituary that ran the next day. Howard Chen, 82, died peacefully at County General Hospital, survived by no immediate family. A quiet life, it seemed. He'd emigrated from Taiwan in 1967, worked as an accountant for 42 years, never married, no children. The obituary was 3 paragraphs long, respectful but sparse. No one had much to say about him. I drove back to County General the next night, found Beth again. I need to ask you about Mr. Chen, the man I transported last night. She looked wary. What about him? Did he say anything before he died? Any last words? He'd been non-responsive for hours. Why? Humor me. Beth thought for a moment. The previous shift nurse mentioned that he was conscious earlier in the day. Around 6 p.m., I think. He asked for a pen and paper, wanted to write something down. My stomach tightened. Did he write anything? If he did, I don't know what happened to it. It's not in his chart. Maybe he changed his mind. He had the stroke, Renee. His motor control was pretty compromised. Could he have signed his name? Would his hand have been steady enough? Beth frowned. I don't know. Maybe. Why are you asking this? I didn't tell her, just thanked her and left. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Mr. Chen, conscious at 6 p.m., asking for pen and paper, dying 3 hours later, and somehow his signature appearing on my transport form. I kept the copy of that form. It's in my glove compartment now, in a plastic sleeve. I've transported probably 60 bodies since that night, and every time I get a signature, I check the form 3 times before I leave the facility and 3 times when I arrive at the destination. Because sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving with a body in the back, I glance at the clipboard and wonder if I'll see another signature appear. Another shaky hand writing a name that shouldn't be possible. I wonder if Mr. Chen was trying to tell me something. If that signature was his wink of saying he hadn't been alone when he died, that I'd been there, that someone had witnessed his passing, even if it was just the transport driver who'd come to collect his body. Or maybe he was trying to tell me something else, that he wasn't ready, that he didn't want to go, that he was reaching out one last time, the only way he knew how, by signing his name on a form that would acknowledge his existence even in death. I'll never know, but I still have that form, and sometimes when I pull night shifts and the city is quiet and I'm alone on dark roads with silence in the back of my van, I take it out and look at that signature. Howard Chen, written in a hand that shouldn't have been able to write, appearing on paper that no living person touched. And I think about all the other people I've transported who died alone, who had no one to sign for them, who passed without witness or farewell. I think about them, and I wonder how many signatures I've missed. Some graves settle more than others, and grave 12D has been settling for 9 years in ways that don't make sense. My name is Tom, and I've been the head caretaker at Riverside Cemetery for 26 years. I've seen soil shift, caskets settle, ground collapse over old graves. It's part of the natural process. Earth compacts, wood deteriorates, space fills in. Usually, a grave settles significantly in the first year, then stabilizes. Maybe you add soil once or twice more over the next few years, but after that, it's done. Grave 12D has never been done. The plot belongs to a man named Victor Reeves, buried in October of 2016. I remember the funeral. It was a cold, rainy day, and only 4 people attended. Reeves had been in his 70s, a widower with no children, and according to the funeral director, he'd outlived most of his friends. The service was brief. The burial was efficient. Nothing unusual about it at all. 3 months later, I noticed the grave had settled, not dramatically, but enough that I needed to add soil and reseed the grass. Standard procedure, I brought in topsoil, filled the depression, scattered grass seed, and moved on. 6 months after that, it had settled again. About the same amount, maybe 3 inches lower than the surrounding ground. I did the same work, more soil, more seed, watered it properly. The grass grew back fine. Then it happened again, and again, and again. For 9 years now, I've been adding soil to grave 12D every few months. It's always the same. I'll come through on my rounds and notice the depression, about 3 to 4 inches deep, right over where the casket should be. The grass doesn't die. The ground doesn't look unstable. It just sinks slowly, persistently, as if something beneath is drawing the earth downward. I reported it to management after the third time. They had someone from the funeral home come out and inspect it. The inspector checked the burial records, confirmed the vault installation was proper, examined the surrounding graves. Everything looked fine. Old casket collapse, he suggested. The wood degrades faster than expected sometimes. It'll stabilize eventually. But it never did. Year after year, I'd add soil to grave 12D. I started keeping a log, dates, amounts of soil used, any observations. In 9 years, I've resodded that grave 17 times. I've added approximately 6 cubic yards of soil to a single plot that should have stabilized after the first year. No other grave in the cemetery has required this much maintenance, not even the graves from the 1800s, many of which are surrounded by collapsed ground and tilted headstones. Those graves settled decades ago and stayed settled, but 12D keeps sinking. Last autumn, I was out there on an October afternoon, standing with my shovel and a wheelbarrow full of topsoil, preparing to fill the depression for the 18th time. It was overcast, the kind of gray afternoon where sound carries strangely and the light feels flat. I'd been working alone, and the cemetery was empty except for a few crows in the oak trees. I was standing directly over the grave, my boot on the edge of the sunken area, when I heard it. Tapping, faint but distinct. 3 beats, a pause, then 3 more beats. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I froze. The sound was coming from beneath my feet, from somewhere below the 3 or 4 inches of depression in the soil, not from deep underground, more like 6 feet down, right about where the casket would be. I stepped back and listened. The tapping continued, same rhythm. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, patient, deliberate, like someone testing something, knocking to see if anyone would answer. I told myself it was water drainage, a pipe somewhere underground, tree roots settling against the vault, anything except what it sounded like, someone knocking from inside the grave. The tapping stopped after maybe 30 seconds. I stood there for 5 minutes, listening, but it didn't resume. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that my mind had manufactured the sound from wind or distant construction or my own breathing. I filled in the depression with soil and left. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, I researched grave settling, read articles about casket collapse, vault degradation, soil compaction. Nothing explained a settling that continued for 9 years. Nothing explained the pattern, the regular intervals, the consistent depth of depression, the localized nature of the problem, and nothing explained the tapping. I went back to grave 12D the next day. No depression yet. The soil I'd added was still level with the surrounding ground. No sounds, just a quiet grave under gray sky. I started visiting more frequently. Every few days, I'd walk through that section, Check on 12D, listen carefully. Most times, I heard nothing, but twice more over the next month, when I stood directly over the grave, I heard that same tapping. Always 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, always from the same depth. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? The grave is tapping at me sounded insane, but I kept my log and I added a new column, auditory events. Each time I heard the tapping, I noted it, date, time, weather conditions, duration. In November, I found something else. After filling the grave for the 19th time, I noticed the soil settling differently. Instead of a general depression across the entire plot, the sunken area was more localized now, concentrated over what would be the head of the casket, as if whatever was below was pulling specifically at that end. I brought a metal probe, the kind we use to locate grave boundaries when headstones are missing. I pushed it into the soil at various points around the grave, testing depth and resistance. Over most of the plot, I hit the concrete vault at about 6 feet, exactly where it should be. But directly over the head of the casket, the probe sank further. 7 feet, 8 feet, 9, as if there was a void below the vault, empty space where there shouldn't be any. That's impossible. The vault is supposed to sit on compacted soil, with backfill surrounding it. There's no room for voids, no space for anything to be hollow. I pulled the probe out and stared at the hole it left. A thin opening, barely an inch across, going down into darkness. And from that hole, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. Closer now, clearer, unmistakably deliberate. I filled the hole with soil and walked away. My hands were shaking. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Report it? To who? The funeral home? Management? The family? Except Victor Reeves had no family. I did nothing, just drove home and tried to forget about it. But the next time the grave settled, I heard the tapping before I even got close. I was walking through the section with my wheelbarrow, and from 30 feet away, I heard it carried on the wind. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. I've stopped using the probe. I don't want to know how deep the void goes. I don't want to know what's making that sound, but I can't stop maintaining the grave. It's my job. Every few months, like clockwork, grave 12D sinks, and I have to fill it in. And every time I do, I hear that tapping. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, as if whatever's down there is trying to communicate. Sometimes, late at night, I lie awake and think about Victor Reeves, a man with no family, no friends, no one to visit his grave, a man who died alone and was buried with only 4 people present. I wonder if that's why the grave won't settle, if maybe he's not at rest, if maybe he's trying to tell someone, anyone, that he's still there. Or maybe he's trying to tell me something else, that he wasn't ready, that he's not finished, that whatever death is, he's still experiencing it, still aware somehow, still tapping out a message from 6 feet under. Last week I was filling the grave again, the 20th time now, when I noticed something in the grass near the headstone. A small impression, like someone had stood there recently. But when I examined it closer, I realized it wasn't a footprint. It was a handprint, palm flat against the ground, fingers splayed, as if someone had been lying face down on the grave and pressed their hand into the soft earth. I've seen a lot of things in 26 years. I've seen graves vandalized, headstones stolen, flowers destroyed, but I've never seen anything like that handprint pressed into the ground above Victor Reeves's casket. I filled the depression with soil, covered the handprint, and left. But I keep thinking about it, about the position, face down, hand reaching toward the grave, as if someone was trying to reach through the earth, or as if someone below was trying to reach up. This morning, I went back to grave 12D. It hasn't settled again yet, but I know it will. In a few weeks, maybe less, I'll notice that familiar depression and I'll bring my wheelbarrow and shovel and add more soil. And when I do, I know I'll hear it. Tap, tap, tap. Pause, tap, tap, tap. I don't know what Victor Reeves is trying to tell me. I don't know if he's aware, if he's suffering, if he's trying to communicate or simply responding to some unconscious impulse from wherever death has taken him. But I know this. Grave 12D will never stabilize. I'll be adding soil to it until I retire, and whoever takes over as caretaker after me will do the same. We'll keep filling that grave, keep covering that persistent void, keep listening to that rhythmic tapping that comes from below. And maybe, decades from now, someone will finally understand what Victor Reeves was trying to say. Or maybe we never will. Maybe that's the worst part of all, not knowing if he's trying to tell us he's still there, still conscious, still trapped in whatever comes after death, still tapping, still waiting, still hoping someone will answer. There was a man who attended every funeral for 3 months, and I didn't realize he was dead until the day I tried to speak to him. My name is Director Vasquez. Most people call me Director or just Vasquez, and I've been running memorial services at Greenfield Funeral Home for 17 years. In that time, I've become familiar with certain types of mourners. There are the professionals, funeral directors from other homes, clergy members, hospice workers. There are the grief tourists, people who attend services for those they barely knew, drawn by morbid curiosity or social obligation. And then there are the genuinely bereaved, whose pain is visible in every movement. The man in the gray suit didn't fit any category. I first noticed him in late January at a service for Dorothy Hartwell, an 86-year-old woman who'd lived in the community for 60 years. It was a well-attended service, maybe 70 people, and he was easy to overlook. He sat in the back row of our chapel, slightly apart from the other mourners, wearing a gray suit that looked expensive, but dated, like something from the 1980s. He was probably in his mid-60s, with white hair and a lined face that suggested someone who'd lived through significant hardship. I noticed him because he arrived 15 minutes before anyone else and sat perfectly still in that back pew, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed on the casket at the front of the chapel. He didn't fidget, didn't check his phone, didn't look around, just sat and watched the casket with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between sadness and longing. When the service ended, He was the last to leave. He stood as the family filed out, bowed his head briefly, and walked toward the side exit. I meant to catch him, to thank him for attending, but by the time I reached the door, he was gone. 3 days later, I saw him again at Robert Morrison's funeral. Different deceased, different family, but the same man in the same gray suit, sitting in the same position, back row, slightly apart, perfectly still, same expression, same quiet attention on the casket. This time, I made sure to position myself near the side exit where he'd left before. But when the service ended and the mourners filed out, he simply wasn't there. I'd been watching that door. No one had left through it. Yet his pew was empty. Over the next month, I saw him at 7 more services, different deceased each time, old and young, men and women, well-attended services, and intimate gatherings. But always he was there, always in that gray suit, always in the back, always alone. I started checking the guest books. We keep them at the entrance to the chapel, ask mourners to sign in with their names and relationship to the deceased. I went through every entry for the services he'd attended. He'd never signed. In February, I asked my assistant, Marcus, if he'd noticed the man. We were preparing for a service for a teenage boy who died in a car accident, and I'd spotted the man in gray already seated in his usual spot. Back row, gray suit, white hair, I said. Marcus glanced toward the back of the chapel. I don't see anyone. He's right there. Marcus looked again, squinting slightly. Director, the chapel's empty except for us. I turned to look. The man was there, clear as day, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes on the casket we'd just positioned at the front. Marcus, you're telling me you don't see him? Gray suit, white hair, sitting in the last pew. Marcus's expression shifted to something like concern. There's no one there. I walked toward the back of the chapel. The man didn't move, didn't acknowledge me approaching. As I got closer, I noticed details I'd missed before. His suit was impeccably clean, but slightly faded, as if it had been worn many times. His shoes were polished, but worn at the heels. His hands, folded so carefully in his lap, were thin and veined, the hands of someone elderly. Excuse me, I said, stopping a few feet from his pew. He didn't respond, didn't even blink. Sir? Nothing. He continued staring forward, that expression of longing fixed on his face. I reached out to touch his shoulder, and my hand passed through empty air. I jerked back, my heart suddenly pounding. The man was still there, still visible, still sitting in that pew. But when I reached for him, there was nothing, just air, just space, just the empty wooden bench. I turned to Marcus. He was standing near the front of the chapel, watching me with obvious worry. Director, are you okay? You really don't see him. See who? I looked back at the pew. The man in gray was gone. The space where he'd been sitting was empty, the wood showing no depression, no warmth, no sign anyone had been there. I couldn't speak, just stood there, staring at that empty pew, trying to reconcile what I'd seen, what I'd tried to touch, with the space that now contained nothing. The service went on as planned. The family arrived, mourners gathered, We conducted the ceremony with our usual professionalism, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the back row, expecting to see the man in gray. He never appeared. Not for that service, not for the rest of that day. But 3 days later, at a service for an elderly woman named Margaret Pine, he was back. Same spot, same suit, same expression. I didn't approach him this time, just watched from a distance, noting every detail I could. The way he sat absolutely still, the way his eyes never left the casket, the way he seemed to exist slightly out of sync with the rest of the room, visible to me, but apparently to no one else. After the service, I watched him stand and walk toward the side exit. He moved smoothly, without hurry, his footsteps making no sound on the chapel floor. When he reached the door, a heavy oak door that we keep locked during services, he didn't reach for the handle. He simply walked forward, and I watched him pass directly through the door as if it wasn't there. I ran to the door, unlocked it, threw it open. The hallway beyond was empty. No one, nothing, just our familiar corridor leading to the office wing. That night, I went through our chapel records going back 5 years. I listed every person who died and been memorialized at Greenfield, then cross-referenced those names against our local obituary archives. I found him on the 3rd year back. Thomas Franklin Marsh, age 67, died December 8th, 2020. Services held at Greenfield Funeral Home. Survived by no immediate family. A quiet life, according to the obituary. He'd worked as an accountant, never married, lived alone in a small apartment downtown. The obituary listed no cause of death, just noted he'd passed peacefully. I pulled our files on his service. Small attendance, maybe 15 people, mostly co-workers and neighbors. We'd conducted a simple ceremony, cremation to follow. Nothing unusual, nothing that stood out. Except the photograph attached to his file, the one we'd used for the memorial display. Thomas Franklin Marsh, in a gray suit, his white hair neatly combed, his thin face showing that same expression of quiet longing. I felt something cold move through my chest. I closed the file and sat in my office, trying to process what this meant. The man I'd been seeing at services for 3 months was dead, had been dead for 4 years, and yet he was appearing at other people's funerals, sitting in the back, watching, mourning. But mourning what? He didn't know these people. There was no connection between him and the deceased whose services he attended, unless he wasn't mourning them, unless he was mourning something else. I started paying closer attention. Every service where he appeared, and he appeared at about 2/3 of them, no pattern I could discern, I noted what kind of ceremony it was. Were they old or young, well attended or sparsely? Expected deaths or sudden? After 2 weeks of observation, I found the pattern. He only appeared at services where the deceased had died alone. Every single one. Dorothy Hartwell, who'd lived alone after her husband's death. Robert Morrison, widower with no children, the teenage boy, whose single mother had been at work when he died in the accident. Margaret Pine, whose family lived out of state and hadn't arrived until after her death. They'd all died alone, and Thomas Franklin Marsh was attending their funerals. I reviewed his obituary again. Passed peacefully, it said, but it didn't say where. I called the funeral director who'd handled his service, a colleague at another home who'd since retired. Thomas Marsh, he said over the phone. Yeah, I remember him. Sad case. Died alone in his apartment. Landlord found him 3 days later when neighbors complained about the smell. No family to claim him. We had to track down an old employer to authorize the cremation. How long had he been dead when they found him? The ME said at least 72 hours, maybe more. 3 days. Thomas Franklin Marsh had died alone in his apartment and hadn't been discovered for 3 days. And now he was appearing at the funerals of others who died alone, sitting in the back, watching, bearing witness. I've stopped trying to interact with him. When he appears, and he still does, 1 or 2 services a week, I let him sit. I don't tell the families. I don't point him out to Marcus or the other staff. I just let him be there, bearing witness to deaths that echo his own. Sometimes I wonder if he knows what he's doing, if there's consciousness there, awareness, or if it's something more automatic, a ghost playing out the same pattern, attending the funerals he never had. Because Thomas Marsh's service was sparsely attended. 15 people who barely knew him, who came out of obligation or courtesy, no one who mourned him deeply, no one who missed him personally. Maybe that's what he's doing. Maybe he's offering to these deceased what he never received. Someone in the back row, someone watching, someone present for their final goodbye. Last week, I had a service for a 92-year-old man named Howard Chen. He died alone at County General Hospital after a stroke. No family, no visitors during his 6-day stay. 8 people attended his service, mostly staff from his former workplace. Thomas Marsh was in the back row, in his gray suit, his hands folded in his lap. And this time, I did something different. At the end of the service, after everyone else had left, I stood at the front of the chapel and spoke directly to him. Thank you for coming, I said, for bearing witness, for being here when others aren't. He didn't respond, didn't move, just sat there, his eyes on the casket, his expression unchanged. But as I watched, he stood slowly, bowed his head toward the casket, and walked toward the side door. He didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge I'd spoken, just moved with that same fluid, silent grace toward the locked oak door. And then he walked through it and was gone. I haven't seen him since. It's been 2 weeks now, and we've held 6 services for people who died alone, but Thomas Marsh hasn't appeared. I don't know if my acknowledgement somehow released him, gave him permission to stop attending these funerals. I don't know if he's finally at rest, or maybe he's just attending services somewhere else now, at some other funeral home, sitting in some other back row, bearing witness, making sure no one goes unmourned, making sure no one dies completely alone. I've watched thousands of hours of security footage, but the figure on camera 9 has been there for 83 nights, and I still don't know what it wants. My name is Luis, and I'm the overnight security guard at Eternal Rest Mausoleum. It's a position that sounds more dramatic than it is. Mostly, I sit in a cramped booth with 12 security monitors, watching empty hallways and making sure nobody breaks in to vandalize crypts or steal memorial plaques. In 4 years on the job, I've had maybe 6 real incidents. The rest is just quiet hours, coffee, and surveillance footage of nothing happening. The Mausoleum is a large facility built in the 1920s and expanded several times since. 3 floors of crypts, indoor corridors with marble floors and vaulted ceilings. The kind of place that's meant to feel peaceful and dignified. During the day, it's beautiful. At night, with only emergency lighting and shadows, it's something else. I have 12 cameras positioned throughout the building. Cameras 1 through 4 cover the entrances and exterior. 5 through 8 monitor the stairwells and main corridors. 9 through 12 watch the crypt wings, long hallways lined with brass-faced burial vaults, flowers and photographs placed in small niches beside each name. Camera 9 covers the central hallway on the second floor, the oldest section of the building. It's a long corridor, maybe 60 feet, with crypts lining both walls and a small chapel at the far end. The camera is positioned at one end of the hall, providing a clear view straight down the corridor. The figure appeared on camera 9 for the first time on March 14th. I noticed it during my 2:30 a.m. walkthrough of the monitors. I have a routine. I cycle through all 12 cameras every 20 minutes, checking for anything unusual. When I switched to camera 9, I saw someone standing in the hallway. Not walking, not moving, just standing, perfectly still, about halfway down the corridor, directly in front of Crypt 340. My first thought was that someone had broken in, but all the entry cameras showed nothing. No forced doors, no broken windows, no sign of intrusion. I radioed my supervisor, then grabbed my flashlight and went to check the second floor. The walk from my booth to the second floor takes about 3 minutes. I moved quickly, my footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. When I reached the second floor, I pushed through the door into the central hallway, the same corridor I'd just seen on camera 9. It was empty, no one there. Just the long stretch of marble floor, the brass-faced crypts gleaming dully in the emergency lighting, and silence. I walked the entire length of the hall, checking every door, every alcove, every possible hiding spot. Nothing, no one. The chapel at the far end was locked, the windows sealed. I even checked Crypt 340, where the figure had been standing. The brass facing was cool under my hand, undisturbed, the flowers in the adjacent niche fresh but wilting slightly. I went back to my booth and reviewed the footage. Rewound camera 9 to 228. There, at 229, a figure appeared in the frame. It wasn't walking into view, it just appeared instantaneously, as if it had been edited into the footage. One frame, empty hallway, the next frame, a person standing there. The figure was dark, indistinct. I couldn't make out details. No face, no clothing features, just a human-shaped silhouette standing motionless in front of Crypt 340. I watched the timestamp tick forward. 2:30 when I'd noticed it. 2:33 when I'd left my booth. 2:36 when I'd reached the second floor. At 2:35, the figure was still there on the footage, standing in the same position while I was physically in that hallway, seeing nothing. At 2:37, it vanished, same as its appearance. One frame showing the figure, the next frame showing empty hallway. I filed a report with my supervisor, checked all the equipment, had a technician come out the next day to examine camera 9, verify it was functioning properly. Everything checked out. The camera was working perfectly, but the figure came back. The next night, at 2:47 a.m., I switched to camera 9 and saw it standing in the same spot, same position, same indistinct silhouette, directly in front of Crypt 340. I didn't go to check this time, just watched the monitor. The figure stood there for approximately 30 minutes, completely motionless, then vanished at 3:17 a.m. It's been 83 nights now. The figure appears on camera 9 almost every night, always around 2:45 a.m., always in the same position. It stands for 20 to 45 minutes, then disappears. Never moves, never shifts position, just stands there, as if waiting for something. I've walked that hallway dozens of times while the figure is visible on camera. I've stood in the exact spot where it appears, looked directly at the space the camera shows it occupying. There's never anything there. No cold spots, no sounds, no visual anomaly, just empty hallway. But on the monitor, clear as day, the figure stands and waits. I researched Crypt 340. It belongs to a woman named Eleanor Vance, who died in 1956 at age 42. No spouse listed, no children. According to the Mausoleum records, she purchased the crypt for herself 5 years before her death. No one has visited in decades. The flowers in the niche are artificial, placed there by mausoleum staff as part of the standard maintenance. I found Eleanor's obituary in the library archives. A brief notice. Eleanor Vance, 42, died suddenly at home. Services at Eternal Rest Chapel. No cause of death listed, no surviving family mentioned, just those few lines, and then nothing, a life that left barely a trace. I don't know if the figure is Eleanor Vance. I don't know if it's related to her at all, but it stands in front of her crypt every night, and that can't be coincidence. The other guards have seen it too. When I mentioned it to Marcus, the weekend overnight, he admitted he'd noticed the same thing. I thought the camera was glitching, he said. I'd see this dark shape standing there, but when I'd go check, nothing. Figured it was a shadow or something. But shadows don't appear and disappear in seconds. Shadows don't stand perfectly still for half an hour in a hallway with no light source to cast them. Last month, I tried something different. When the figure appeared at 2:47, I took a photograph of the monitor screen showing camera 9. Then I went to the second floor, stood in the exact position where the figure was visible on camera, and took a photograph of the hallway. The monitor photograph showed the figure clearly, a dark silhouette, human-shaped, standing motionless. The hallway photograph showed nothing. Empty corridor, brass crypts, emergency lighting, no figure, no shadow, nothing. I've started arriving at the mausoleum earlier, before the figure's usual appearance time. I position myself in the security booth and watch camera 9 continuously from 2:30 onward. I've documented every appearance, time, duration, any variations. There are no variations. The figure always appears between 2:45 and 2:50, always stands in the same position, always disappears between 3:15 and 3:25. It never moves, never approaches the camera, never does anything but stand and wait. The smell started 3 weeks ago. I noticed it first during one of my physical checks of the second floor hallway. I was walking past Crypt 340, where the figure stands on camera, and caught a scent in the air. Perfume, old-fashioned and heavy, the kind women wore decades ago, mixed with something else, something slightly sweet and cloying that reminded me of flowers left too long in a vase. The smell was strongest directly in front of Crypt 340. It faded within a few steps in either direction, but right there, in that specific spot, it was overwhelming. I mentioned it to the day shift supervisor. She said she'd check for water leaks or deteriorating seal gaskets in the crypts. But when the maintenance team examined 340 and the surrounding vaults, they found nothing wrong. No leaks, no decomposition issues, no explanation for the smell. But it's there every night now. When I walk that hallway during the hours the figure appears on camera, the smell is present. Old perfume and wet soil, and something underneath that I can't quite identify. Something that makes my stomach turn and my skin prickle. I've stopped doing physical checks during the figure's appearance times. I just watch on camera 9, documenting the nightly visitation, and stay in my booth. But watching isn't passive anymore, because I've started noticing details I missed before. The figure has a face. I can't see it clearly. The camera resolution isn't high enough, and the lighting is too dim. But when I zoom in on the digital feed and enhance the image, I can make out suggestions of features. The outline of a head, the shadow of hair, and something that might be eyes, dark smudges where eyes would be, directed not at Crypt 340, but at the camera itself, at me, watching from my booth. 2 nights ago, something changed. The figure appeared at its usual time, 2:47 a.m., in its usual position. But instead of standing motionless for 30 minutes, it moved, not much, just a slight turn of the head, a repositioning of the shoulders from facing the crypt to facing the camera directly. And it stayed that way for 43 minutes, the longest duration I've recorded. Just standing there, facing the camera, while I sat in my booth, watching it watch me through the monitor. When it vanished at 3:30, I realized my hands were shaking. Last night, it happened again, but this time, the figure didn't just turn toward the camera, it took a step forward. One step, maybe 2 feet closer to the camera's position. Then it stood there for 51 minutes before vanishing. It's getting closer, incrementally, patiently, but definitely closer. 2 steps last night, maybe 3 steps tonight. Eventually, it will reach the camera's position at the end of the hallway. And then what? I've considered quitting, just walking away from this job and never coming back. But something keeps me here. Partially, it's curiosity. I need to know what this is, what it wants, what happens when it finally reaches the end of that hallway. And partially, It's something else, something I can't quite name. A sense of responsibility, maybe, or witnessing, because whoever that figure is, whether it's Eleanor Vance or someone else connected to Crypt 340, they're alone. They appear every night in an empty hallway in a silent building, seen by no one except the security cameras and the guard watching from a booth. Someone needs to witness them. Someone needs to acknowledge they're there, even if I don't understand what they are or what they want. Tonight is night 84. I'm sitting in my booth, coffee cooling beside me, all 12 monitors displaying their feeds. It's 2:43 a.m. In approximately 4 minutes, the figure will appear on camera 9. I'll watch it take another step or two closer. I'll note the time and duration. I'll sit here in my booth with the smell of coffee and the hum of electronics, watching a dark figure stand in an empty hallway 60 feet away. And I'll wonder, as I do every night, what happens when it finally reaches the camera? What happens when there's no more hallway between us? What happens when the figure that only exists on surveillance footage stands directly in front of me, so close that camera 9 and my booth are in the same space? The timestamp reads 2:46 now. One more minute. I'm watching camera 9. The hallway is empty, but not for long, never for long. The phone lit up 17 times during calling hours, and in every single call came from a number that had been disconnected 12 years ago. My name is Iris, and I've been a funeral assistant at Morrison and Sons for 6 years. My job is to handle the practical details that families don't think about during their grief, arranging flowers, managing the guest book, ensuring the viewing room is maintained properly, and dozens of other small tasks that help services run smoothly. It's detail-oriented work, and I'm good at it. I notice things, small things, things most people would overlook, which is why I noticed the phone. The deceased was a young woman named Samantha Porter, 28 years old, who died suddenly from a brain aneurysm while at work. Her family was devastated. Her parents, two younger siblings, a long-term boyfriend, dozens of friends. The viewing was scheduled for 2 days, calling hours from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8, both afternoons. During the arrangement conference, Samantha's mother, Rebecca, made an unusual request. She wanted Samantha's phone placed in the casket with her. Not unusual in itself. We often include personal items for burial, but Rebecca was specific about the details. The phone needed to be charged, powered on, and placed in Samantha's hand. She was never without it, Rebecca explained, her voice hollow. She'd feel wrong without it. We accommodated the request. I made sure Samantha's phone, an iPhone with a rose gold case, was fully charged before the viewing. I powered it on and placed it carefully in her right hand, arranging her fingers so they appeared to be holding it naturally. The first calling hours session started at 2 p.m. on Thursday. About 40 people attended that afternoon, a steady stream of mourners paying their respects. I stood in the back of the viewing room, monitoring the temperature, the lighting, the general atmosphere. Everything was proceeding normally until approximately 3:15. That's when I noticed the light. A soft glow from inside the casket. blue-white, the unmistakable brightness of a phone screen activating. I moved closer, trying to be unobtrusive. Samantha's hand was still positioned as I'd arranged it. Her fingers curled around the phone, but the screen was lit, showing an incoming call notification. The screen displayed home calling. I watched for a moment. The phone rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. The screen dimmed around me. Mourners continued their quiet conversations, moving slowly past the casket, offering condolences to the family. No one else seemed to have noticed. 5 minutes later, it happened again. The phone screen lit up. Home. Calling. This time I was close enough to see more details. The contact name was saved as home in all capitals. No other information, just that single word. 4 rings, then voicemail, screen dimmed. By 4 p.m., when the first calling hours session ended, the phone had lit up 6 times. Always the same caller, always the same pattern. During the break between sessions, I approached Rebecca quietly. We were in the family room, and she was sitting with a cup of tea she hadn't touched, staring at nothing. "Mrs. Porter," I said gently, "I wanted to let you know Samantha's phone has been receiving calls. The screen shows home as the caller ID. I thought you might want to know." Rebecca looked at me for a long moment. Her face had been pale before. Now it went paper white. "That's not possible," she said. "I saw it myself, multiple calls during the viewing." Rebecca set down her teacup with a hand that trembled. "The home number is our landline. We disconnected it 12 years ago when we switched to cell phones only. That number doesn't exist anymore." I felt something cold move through me. Could someone else have that number now? Maybe it was reassigned. I called the phone company after we disconnected it, specifically asked them not to reassign the number, had it permanently retired. "It's gone, Iris. That number doesn't connect to anything." We stared at each other. Rebecca's younger daughter, Emma, approached, asking a question about flowers, and the moment broke. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. A disconnected number, calling a phone held in the hands of a dead woman. The evening session started at 6. I positioned myself where I could watch the casket closely without being obvious. More mourners arrived. Samantha's college friends, co-workers, extended family. The room filled with quiet conversation and suppressed grief. At 6:22, the phone lit up. Home. Calling. At 6:49, again. Home calling. At 7:18, 7:34, 7:51. Each time, 4 rings, then voicemail. Each time, that same caller ID glowing in the casket. During one of the calls, I was standing near enough to hear it. The ringtone was barely audible over the murmur of conversation, but I caught it. A simple melody, something classical that I didn't recognize. And underneath that sound, something else, something that might have been static or might have been breathing. I'm not easily unsettled. I work with death daily. I've seen bodies in various states, handled difficult families, managed challenging situations. But watching that phone light up over and over, seeing that disconnected number calling from nowhere, hearing what might have been breathing underneath the ringtone, that unsettled me. After the evening session ended and the last mourners had left, I helped Samantha's boyfriend, David, gather some photographs they'd displayed around the viewing room. He'd been standing by the casket for most of the evening, his grief visible in every line of his body. Did Samantha ever talk about that landline number? I asked carefully. The home contact in her phone? David looked puzzled. What landline? The one saved as home in her contacts. It's been calling during the viewing. Samantha didn't have a landline contact. She only had cell numbers. He pulled out his own phone, opened his contacts. See, I have her parents as Rebecca Cell and Michael Cell. She organized hers the same way. Could you check? I asked. If you have her phone passcode. He did. We went to the casket together. Empty room now, just the two of us and Samantha's body. David carefully took the phone from her hand. His fingers were shaking. He unlocked it and navigated to the contacts, scrolled through, then stopped, his face going pale. This wasn't here before, he said, turning the screen toward me. The contact list showed maybe 60 entries, all the usual names, family, friends, coworkers, but at the top of the list, alphabetically first, was an entry that hadn't been there before. Home. No phone number associated with it. No email, no address, no other information. Just that single word in all capitals. She didn't have this contact, David insisted. I've looked at her phone 1,000 times. This wasn't there. He clicked on it. The contact entry was created on the day of the viewing at 2:47 p.m., approximately the time the first call came in. Should I delete it? David asked. Something made me say no. Leave it. Let's see what happens tomorrow. The second day of calling hours followed the same pattern. The phone lit up 19 times total, 9 during the afternoon session, 10 in the evening, always the home contact, always 4 rings, then voicemail. Rebecca started noticing it too. During the afternoon session, I saw her standing by the casket, staring down at her daughter's hand and the phone it held. When the phone lit up with another call, she flinched visibly. She found me during the break. It's called 43 times now, she said. Her voice was flat, exhausted. I've been counting. Have you thought about answering it? She looked at me like I'd suggested something obscene. How? She's dead, Iris. I can't take the phone out of my daughter's casket during her viewing and answer calls from a number that doesn't exist. But I could see the thought working in her mind. The temptation, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, it was Samantha trying to reach out. That some part of her consciousness was still there, still trying to connect, still calling home. During the final evening session, at 7:45, the phone rang again. This time, Rebecca was standing beside the casket when it happened. I watched her reach out, hesitate, then gently slide the phone from Samantha's hand. She stared at the screen. Home calling. The room had maybe 20 people in it, all engaged in their own conversations, their own grief. No one was paying attention to Rebecca standing there with her dead daughter's phone. She answered it. I was close enough to see her face change, to see the color drain from her cheeks, her eyes widen, her mouth open slightly. She held the phone to her ear for maybe 10 seconds. Then she ended the call, replaced the phone in Samantha's hand, and walked quickly out of the room. I found her in the bathroom 5 minutes later. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, tears streaming down her face. "What did you hear?" I asked quietly. She shook her head. "Nothing. Static. And underneath it what? Music. Very faint. It was the song we used to play when she was little, a lullaby, something my mother taught me. I'd sing it to her every night before bed, from when she was a baby until she was probably 5 years old. I haven't heard it in decades." "Could it have been a recording?" "No, it was live. Someone was humming it, and the voice." She looked up at me, her eyes red. "It sounded like her, like Samantha when she was 4 years old, humming along with me before bed." The funeral was the next day. We sealed the casket that night. After calling an hour's ended standard procedure we always seal before transport to the church. Samantha's phone was still in her hand, still powered on, the battery at 47%. The phone continued to ring during the funeral service. I could hear it faintly from inside the sealed casket, that muffled ringtone, barely audible beneath the organ music and the priest's eulogy. 4 times during the service. Each time, Rebecca's shoulders would tense, her head bowing a little lower. After the burial, when we were back at the funeral home, David approached me. "I need to tell you something. Last night, after everything was over, I went home and looked at Samantha's phone records online. She had them linked to her email, so I could access the account information. And the home number, the one that's been calling, it's not showing up in the call logs. According to the phone records, she hasn't received a single call since she died. The logs show her last incoming call was at 9:37 a.m. the day she collapsed. Nothing after that. But we both saw it. The phone lit up dozens of times." "I know, but according to the carrier, those calls never happened." I didn't know what to say. We stood there in the parking lot, both of us trying to process what this meant. Calls that happened but didn't. A disconnected number that shouldn't exist calling a dead woman's phone, playing lullabies from her childhood. That was 3 weeks ago. Yesterday, Rebecca called me. She was hesitant, apologetic for bothering me, but she needed to tell someone. "My landline number," she said, "the one we disconnected 12 years ago. I called the phone company yesterday just to confirm it was still retired." "Was it?" "They have no record of us ever having that number. According to their system, the number I remember, the number I had for 23 years, never existed. It's not in their database, not retired, not disconnected, not reassigned, just never there." I think about Samantha's phone, sealed in a casket, 6 feet underground, its battery slowly draining. I wonder if it's still receiving calls from home, if that disconnected, non existent number is still trying to reach her, if somewhere in the static and the silence there's a little girl humming a lullaby, trying to remember the words her mother taught her. I wonder if the calls will ever stop, or if they'll continue forever, ringing in the dark, answered only by silence and the small hand of a daughter who can no longer pick up. who can no longer come home. I found a suitcase full of photographs while digging adjacent to Plot 29, and the last photograph showed a grave that hasn't been opened yet. My name is Ray, and I've been a gravedigger at Hillcrest Cemetery for 33 years. It's hard, physical work that most people don't want to do, but I've never minded it. There's something honest about preparing final resting places, about ensuring people are buried with dignity and care. I've dug hundreds of graves, maybe over 1,000 at this point. I know the soil in every section, where the ground is rocky, where tree roots intrude, where the water table rises after heavy rain. Plot 29 is in Section C, the older part of the cemetery, dating back to the 1950s. The plot has been occupied since 1962, a man named Walter Horn, who died at age 54. The grave has been undisturbed for 63 years, just another headstone in a row of many, visited occasionally by what I assume are distant relatives or family friends. Last month, I was assigned to dig Plot 30, directly adjacent to 29. A new burial, a woman named Judith Carr, who died at 91. Her family had purchased the plot years ago, and now it was time to prepare it. I arrived at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday with my backhoe. Standard procedure, I use the machine for the bulk of the digging, then finish the last couple feet by hand to ensure proper dimensions and clean edges. The morning was cool and overcast, good weather for this kind of work. I dug down about 4 feet when the backhoe bucket hit something that wasn't earth or rock. The impact jarred through the machine, and I immediately killed the engine. In 33 years, I've learned to recognize when I've hit something that shouldn't be there. I climbed down and examined the excavation. Partially exposed in the sidewall of the grave, right at the boundary line with Plot 29, was the edge of something leather. Dark brown, rotted with age, but definitely leather. I grabbed a hand shovel and carefully worked the object free. It took about 10 minutes of cautious digging before I could extract it fully. It was a suitcase, old-fashioned, the kind people carried in the 50s or 60s. The leather was deteriorated, the metal clasps corroded, but it was remarkably intact for something that had been buried 4 feet underground for decades. I should have reported it immediately, should have called my supervisor, followed protocol. But curiosity got the better of me. I brushed off the loose soil and tried the clasps. They were stuck, corroded shut. I used a screwdriver to pry them open. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them, all Polaroids, aged and faded, but still visible. I spread them out on the grass beside the grave, trying to understand what I was looking at. They were all pictures of graves, different angles, different times of day, but all graves at Hillcrest Cemetery. I recognized some of the headstones, familiar names from sections I maintained. Each photograph had a date written on the back in black marker, dates ranging from April 19th, 73 to September 8th, 1973. Somebody had spent 5 months photographing graves at night. All the photos were taken in darkness, lit by flash, the headstones stark against black backgrounds. No people in the images, no flowers or decorations. Just graves, photographed methodically, systematically. I sorted through them, trying to find some pattern. They weren't in chronological order inside the suitcase, but when I arranged them by the dates on the back, I could see they progressed through the cemetery section by section. Whoever had taken these had worked methodically, documenting grave after grave over those 5 months. Then I found the final photograph. The last date, September 8th, 1973. It showed plot 29, Walter Horn's grave, photographed at night, the headstone clearly visible in the flash. But the ground in front of the headstone was disturbed, freshly dug, a dark rectangle of exposed earth where grass should have been. I looked at the date again, September 8th, 1973. According to cemetery records, Walter Horn was buried in March of 1962. His grave hadn't been opened hence. So why did this photograph, taken in 1973, show freshly disturbed ground at plot 29? I pulled out my phone and called the cemetery office, asked them to check the records for any activity at plot 29 in September 1973. Exhumations, disinterments, any maintenance work. They called me back 10 minutes later. No activity recorded. Walter Horn's grave had been sealed in March of '62 and never touched since. But the photograph clearly showed disturbed earth, recent digging, fresh soil. I looked at the grave beside me, plot 29, grass covered and undisturbed, exactly as it should look for a grave that's been sealed for 63 years. Then I looked at the Polaroid again, at that rectangle of dark soil photographed 52 years ago. I examined the other photographs more carefully, found 3 more that showed plot 29, all taken on previous dates leading up to that final image. May 2nd, June 19th, July 27th. In the May photograph, the grave looked normal, grass covered, undisturbed, same in June, same in July. But in the September 8th photograph, the grave was open. I spread all the Polaroids out again, looking for any other graves that showed disturbed ground. Found 11, all photographed on different dates throughout those 5 months, and all showing fresh digging, exposed earth, signs of recent activity. I cross-referenced them against the cemetery office records. None of them showed any official activity during 1973. All of them were older graves, some dating back to the 20s and 30s that should have been long settled and untouched. Somebody had been digging at Hillcrest in 1973, digging at multiple graves over 5 months, and documenting it with photographs. But why? And more importantly, what were they looking for? I reported the suitcase to my supervisor. We turned it over to cemetery management, who turned it over to the police. I gave a statement, explained where I'd found it, how it had been buried at the boundary between plots 29 and 30. The police investigation turned up nothing conclusive. The photographs were old. The suitcase provided no identifying information about its owner. They checked records of cemetery staff from 1973, looked for any reported thefts or vandalism from that period. Found nothing useful, but they did notice something I'd missed. When they examined the final photograph, the one showing plot 29 with disturbed earth, they noticed numbers in the corner, faint, barely visible, but definitely there, handwritten in the margin, 3 days, 3 days, as if the photograph was dated 3 days in the future from when it was taken, or 3 days before something was supposed to happen. I went back to the cemetery records, checked the date on that final photograph, September 8th, 1973. 3 days later would have been September 11th. I asked the office to check if anything significant happened at Hillcrest on September 11th, 1973. They found one entry, a burial. A man named Thomas Garrett, age 47, interred on September 11th, 1973, in plot a 30. The grave I'd been digging when I found the suitcase. I stood there in the cemetery office, looking at that record, feeling something cold settle in my chest. The photograph showed plot 29, with disturbed earth, dated 3 days before a burial in plot 30, as if whoever took that picture knew that in 3 days they'd be digging the adjacent grave. I asked to see Thomas Garrett's file. The circumstances of his death were listed as accidental. No other details. I checked the local newspaper archives from September 1973. Found an article dated September 9th. Local man dies in cemetery accident. The article was brief. Thomas Garrett, a groundskeeper at Hillcrest Cemetery, had been killed in an accident involving heavy equipment. No witnesses. He'd been working alone in Section C when it happened. The cemetery had no comment beyond expressing condolences to the family. The article didn't specify which section of Section C, didn't mention which grave he'd been working near. But I knew exactly where he'd been. Working at the boundary between plots 29 and 30, the same place where his suitcase full of photographs would be buried, the same place where he'd eventually be interred 3 days later. I should have left it alone after that. The police had the suitcase, the investigation was closed, and I had a job to finish. But I couldn't stop thinking about those photographs. About Thomas Garrett spending 5 months systematically photographing graves, documenting disturbances that shouldn't have existed, ending with a photograph of plot 29 showing fresh digging 3 days before his death. What had he been investigating? What had he found? Last week, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I returned to plot 29 late at night with a probe rod, the kind we use to verify vault positions and check soil composition. I wanted to know if there was anything unusual about that grave, anything that might explain why Thomas Garrett had photographed it as disturbed. I pushed the probe into the ground at various points around the headstone. Standard resistance at first, grass, topsoil, compacted fill. Then, about 5 feet down on the east side of the grave, the probe sank deeper than it should have. 8 feet, 9 feet, 10. There was a void beneath plot 29, empty space where there should have been solid earth. I pulled the probe out and moved to a different position. Same result. The grave had a hollow space beneath it, as if part of the fill had collapsed or been removed. I checked the adjacent graves, plot 28, plot 30, where Thomas Garrett is buried. Both showed normal resistance, solid earth, At the expected depths, the void was only beneath plot 29. I've been doing this work for 33 years. I know what graves should feel like. I know how earth settles, how vaults sit, how everything should be structured 6 feet down. Plot 29 isn't right. Something beneath that grave is wrong. I reported it to management, told them about the void, suggested we might need to investigate, possibly exhume to ensure the vault integrity. They said they'd look into it. That was 8 days ago. I haven't heard back. But yesterday, when I was working in Section C, I noticed something new at Plot 29. Fresh flowers on the grave. White lilies in a simple glass vase placed directly on the top of the headstone. Walter Horn died in 1962. He has no living relatives listed in the cemetery records. No one has left flowers at his grave in the 12 years I've been maintaining that section. I removed the flowers, threw them in the maintenance shed dumpster. Standard procedure for abandoned or unattributed items. This morning, they were back. Same flowers, same vase, same position. I checked the cemetery's security footage. We have cameras at the entrances and main pathways. No one entered Section C between the time I removed the flowers yesterday and when I found them replaced this morning. But there they were, white lilies, fresh and perfect, sitting on plot 29. I took a photograph of them with my phone. Then I went back to my truck and pulled out the copies of the Polaroids I'd made before turning the suitcase over to police. I'd kept them, against protocol probably, but I couldn't let go of the mystery. I found the final photograph again, the one showing plot 29 with disturbed earth, dated September 8th, 1973, with 3 days written in the margin. I looked at it more carefully this time, really examining every detail, and I noticed something I'd missed before. In the corner of the frame, barely visible in the darkness beyond the flash's reach, was something small and pale. A vase with what looked like flowers in it. I zoomed in on my phone, enhancing the image as much as I could. The vase was glass. The flowers were white. Lilies, if I had to guess. The same flowers that were sitting on the grave right now. The same flowers that had appeared overnight with no explanation. The same flowers that had been there in 1973 when Thomas Garrett photographed the disturbed grave 3 days before his death. I'm standing here now, looking at plot 29. The flowers are still there. The grass is undisturbed, neat and well maintained. The headstone reads Walter Horn, 1908 to 1962, beloved husband. But beneath my feet, I know there's a void, empty space where there should be earth. And somewhere in that darkness, buried at the boundary between plots 29 and 30, Thomas Garrett left his suitcase full of photographs. Evidence of something he'd discovered, then that got him killed. I think he found graves being disturbed, being opened at night, without authorization, without record. I think he spent 5 months documenting it, trying to understand what was happening. And I think when he photographed plot 29, showing fresh digging, he knew something was going to happen in 3 days. Maybe he knew he was going to die. Maybe that's why he dated the photograph, not 3 days until something happened to the grave, but 3 days until something happened to him. 3 days until he'd be buried in the adjacent plot, right next to the mystery he'd been investigating. I've been assigned to maintain Section C for the next month. Every morning, I'll walk past plots 29 and 30, past Walter Horn's grave with its impossible flowers and its hollow earth beneath, past Thomas Garrett's grave, where a man who discovered something dangerous is buried with his secrets. And every morning, I'll wonder if today is the day I'll arrive to find Plot 29 disturbed, if I'll see fresh earth, exposed soil, signs of recent digging, if I'll see exactly what Thomas Garrett photographed 52 years ago, 3 days before he died. The final photograph is in my truck right now, tucked into the glove compartment. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm locking up the equipment shed, I take it out and look at it. At that rectangle of dark soil, at those barely visible flowers, at the date written on the back, September 8th, 1973, and the words in the margin, 3 days. Tomorrow is September 8th. 52 years to the day since Thomas Garrett took that photograph. I don't know what's going to happen, but I've loaded a shovel into my truck, and tomorrow night, after the cemetery closes, I'm going to find out if history repeats itself, if Plot 29 is going to be disturbed again, if I'm going to discover what Thomas Garrett found before he died, and if, 3 days from now, I'll still be here to tell anyone about it. There's a bench near the old section that shows the same scratch marks no matter how many times I paint it, and I finally learned who made them. My name is Samir, and I've been the maintenance lead at Oakwood Cemetery for 16 years. Part of my job involves keeping the grounds beautiful, mowing, trimming, repairing damaged headstones, and maintaining the various benches placed throughout the cemetery for visitors. We have 23 benches total, most of them donated by families as memorials, placed near specific graves so people can sit and visit their loved ones. The widow's bench is what I call it, though that's not its official name. It's located in Section A, the oldest part of the cemetery, beneath an enormous oak tree that's been there longer than the cemetery itself. The bench faces a row of headstones from the 1930s and 40s. Simple granite markers, names worn smooth by decades of weather. It's a quiet spot, peaceful, one of the prettiest areas in Oakwood. The bench is also one of my most frequent maintenance problems. I first painted it in the spring of 2015, shortly after I was promoted to maintenance lead. The wood had weathered badly, the previous coat of forest green paint peeling and faded. I stripped it down, sanded it smooth, applied primer and 2 coats of fresh paint. It looked beautiful when I finished. 3 weeks later, I noticed the breaches, 5 parallel gouges, in the seat of the bench, right in the center, deep scratches down through the paint to the bare wood beneath. They looked like claw marks, though no animal could have made them. They were too evenly spaced, too deliberately placed, more like fingernails dragged across the wood with considerable force. I assumed vandalism. Kids, probably, using keys or some tool to scratch up the bench. I sanded down the damaged area and repainted it. Problem solved. Except a month later, The scratches were back. Same pattern, same location, same depth. 5 parallel gouges, as if someone had clawed at the bench with their fingers. I repainted again, and again the scratches returned. Over the past 9 years, I've repainted that bench 17 times. I've tried different types of paint: oil based, water based, outdoor specific formulations. I've tried different colors, thinking maybe the forest green was inviting vandalism. I've tried applying extra coats, using sealant, adding protective varnish. Nothing works. The scratches always come back. Always the same pattern, always in the same spot, always within a few weeks of repainting. I've never caught anyone damaging the bench. I've checked it at different times of day, set up motion activated cameras pointed at the area. The footage shows nothing unusual, just an empty bench beneath an oak tree, visited occasionally by mourners who sit for a while and then leave, no one scratching it, no vandalism, no explanation for the marks. But the scratches keep appearing. They're just parallel gouges, like fingernails scraping desperately at wood. Last month, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen visited the cemetery. She was walking slowly through Section A with a cane, stopping at various headstones, paying her respects. I was working nearby, trimming the hedges along the main path, when she approached me. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was soft, accented. "That bench under the oak tree, has it always been there?" "As long as I've worked here," I told her. "Since at least 2009, probably longer." She nodded slowly, looking at the bench with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I used to visit this cemetery when I was young, in the 1960s. I remember that bench, and I remember the woman who sat there." Something in her tone made me stop working. "What woman?" "I never knew her name, but she was there every time I visited, always sitting on that bench, always facing the same row of headstones. She wore black, old-fashioned mourning clothes, veils, long skirts, even in summer." "A widow?" I asked. I assumed so. She was always weeping. I could hear her from across the section, these quiet, broken sobs that never stopped. My mother told me to leave her alone, that some grief was too private to intrude upon. Mrs. Chen moved closer to the bench, leaning heavily on her cane. "One day in the summer of 1964, I saw her there as usual. But she wasn't just weeping, she was clawing at the bench, dragging her fingernails across the wood, over and over, making these terrible scratching sounds. Her hands were bleeding, but she didn't stop. She just kept scratching and sobbing, scratching and sobbing. I felt something cold move through my chest. What happened to her? I don't know. That was the last time I saw her. I came back the next week and she wasn't there. Never saw her again after that day." Mrs. Chen looked at me. "But I've never forgotten those scratches. 5 lines across the bench, deep gouges from her fingernails. Is that still there?" I didn't answer immediately, just walked over to the bench where I'd repainted it 2 weeks earlier. The paint was already showing signs of damage. 5 parallel scratches, faint but visible, starting to appear in the exact center of the seat. "Sometimes," I said carefully. Mrs. Chen reached out and touched the bench. Her fingers traced the scratches, following their path across the wood. She was sitting right here when I saw her facing those graves. She gestured to the row of headstones in front of the bench. I always wondered which one was hers, which grave she was mourning. After Mrs. Chen left, I examined the row of headstones the bench faced. There were 11 markers, ranging in date from 1932 to 1948. I wrote down all the names and went back to the cemetery office to check the records. Most of the deceased were elderly people who'd lived full lives, but one stood out. Margaret Thorne died 1947 at age 26. No cause of death listed in our records, just her name, dates, and a note that the plot had been purchased by her husband, William Thorne. I found William Thorne's grave in Section D, the newer part of the cemetery. He died in 2003 at age 82. His headstone listed him as beloved father and grandfather. No mention of Margaret, no indication he'd ever been married before. I researched both names in the local historical society archives, found a brief newspaper article from July 1947. Local woman dies in tragic accident. Margaret Thorne, 26, died Saturday following a fall in her home. She is survived by her husband William and their infant daughter Elizabeth. Services will be held at Oakwood Cemetery. No other details, no explanation of the accident, just those few lines, and then nothing. As if Margaret Thorne had simply ceased to exist, her life reduced to a birth year and a death year on a weathered headstone. But someone had mourned her. Someone had sat on that bench for years, weeping, clawing at the wood with bleeding fingers. I started asking around, talked to the longtime cemetery volunteers, the historical society members, anyone who might remember stories about Oakwood from the 40s and 50s. An elderly volunteer named Dorothy finally gave me something useful. The Thorne Widow, she said, when I described the woman in black. That's what people called her. She came to the cemetery every day for years, sat on that bench from morning until dark, just weeping. People tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't speak, wouldn't acknowledge anyone, just sat and cried. When did she stop coming? Dorothy thought for a moment. 63, 64. I remember hearing she'd passed away, died in her sleep, I think. Never did recover from losing her daughter. Her daughter? Margaret was her daughter? No, dear. Margaret was the daughter-in-law. The Thorne widow was William's mother. She never forgave herself. For what? Dorothy's expression grew sad. William's mother was watching baby Elizabeth the day Margaret died. The fall wasn't an accident. Margaret threw herself down the stairs after suffering from what they called melancholia back then. Postpartum depression, we'd say now. William's mother blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for not getting Margaret help. She spent the rest of her life sitting at that grave, mourning a daughter-in-law she felt she'd failed. I felt pieces clicking into place. A young mother with untreated postpartum depression. A suicide covered up as an accident in 1947. A mother-in-law consumed by guilt, spending years sitting vigil at a grave, clawing at a bench with bleeding fingers, trying to scratch away grief that would never fade. What was her name? I asked. William's mother, Eleanor Thorne. She's buried here too, Section D, same plot as William. They put her next to her son when she died. I found Eleanor Thorne's grave that afternoon, a simple marker next to William's, stating only her name and dates. Eleanor Thorne, 1889, 1963. No epitaph, no indication of the decades she'd spent in mourning. I stood there looking at her grave, thinking about the scratches on the bench, about Mrs. Chen seeing Eleanor clawing at the wood in the summer of 1964, a full year after Eleanor had died. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went to the cemetery after closing, parked my truck by the maintenance shed, and walked to Section A with a flashlight. The bench was empty, just a shadowy form beneath the oak tree. I sat down on it, facing the row of graves where Margaret Thorne was buried. The wood was cool beneath me, and I could feel the faint ridges of the scratches even through my jeans. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, watching, waiting, not sure what I expected to see. Around midnight, I heard it, the sound of crying, soft, broken, the kind of sobbing that comes from someplace deep and irreparable. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carried on the night air like wind through the trees. But there was no wind. The leaves on the oak tree hung perfectly still. The crying continued. I turned on my flashlight, sweeping it across the graves, across the bench, across the empty spaces between the headstones. Nothing. No one. Just that sound of weeping, persistent and heartbroken. Then I felt the bench move beneath me. Not violently, just a subtle shift, as if someone had sat down beside me. The wood creaked slightly under additional weight that I couldn't see. The scratching started immediately, wood on wood, fingernails dragging across the bench seat next to where I was sitting. I shone my flashlight on the spot and watched, my hands shaking, as 5 parallel gouges appeared in the paint. Deep scratches forming before my eyes, wood shavings curling up from invisible claws, the sound of it mixing with that endless, heartbroken crying. I didn't run. I should have, probably, but I didn't. I just sat there, watching the scratches appear, listening to Eleanor Thorne weep for a daughter-in-law she couldn't save and a grief she couldn't escape. When it stopped, maybe 5 minutes later, the crying faded, the extra weight on the bench disappeared. I was alone again, sitting under an oak tree in an empty cemetery, looking at fresh scratches and paint I'd applied 2 weeks earlier. I haven't tried to repaint the bench since then. What's the point? The scratches will come back. They always do. Because Eleanor Thorne is still sitting there, still mourning, still clawing at the wood with the same desperate, helpless grief she felt 60 years ago. Sometimes, when I'm working in Section A, I see her. Just brief glimpses in my peripheral vision, a figure in black sitting on the bench, shoulders shaking with sobs. When I turn to look directly, she's gone, but I know she was there. Their visitors have seen her too. They don't usually report it. Who wants to admit they saw a ghost? But I can tell from the way they hurry past that bench, from the way they glance back over their shoulders, from the way they never sit on it, even when they're tired from walking the grounds. The bench stays empty now, except for Eleanor. and the scratches remain. 5 parallel gouges in the wood, renewed every few weeks like a wound that won't heal. I've stopped thinking of it as vandalism. It's not damage, it's evidence, proof that some grief is too profound to end with death, that some regret is too deep to ever fade. Eleanor Thorne sits on that bench beneath the oak tree, facing Margaret's grave, weeping for a life she couldn't save and a pain she carries still. And she'll be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, scratching at wood that can't feel her pain, crying tears that no one can see, mourning forever in a grief that has no end. The body exhaled my name, and I heard my father's voice come from a dead man's throat. My name is Ellis, and I've been a mortician for 9 years. I work at Riverside Mortuary, where I handle the technical aspects of death that most people don't think about: embalming, preparation, restoration. It's precise work that requires both scientific knowledge and artistic skill. I take pride in doing it well, in treating the deceased with respect and care. I know about post-mortem processes. I understand rigor mortis, livor mortis, the way gases build up in body cavities and sometimes escape. I've heard the sounds bodies make, the sighs, the groans, the various releases that occur as decomposition begins. None of it bothers me. These are natural processes, biological certainties, nothing supernatural or frightening about them. At least, that's what I believed until last month. The deceased was an elderly man named Robert Sinclair, 84 years old, who died at home from congestive heart failure. He'd been discovered by his daughter about 6 hours after death, which meant he'd already begun the early stages of decomposition when he arrived at the mortuary. Not unusual. I've worked with bodies in far worse condition. I received the body at approximately 2 p.m. on a Thursday. Standard intake procedure: verify the identity, check the paperwork, note any special requests from the family. The daughter had asked for an open casket viewing, which meant I'd need to do restorative work on his face, which had some discoloration from the delay in discovery. I wheeled the gurney into the preparation room, where I'd transfer him to the embalming table. The room was quiet except for the hum of the ventilation system and the fluorescent lights. I've performed this transfer hundreds of times. Position the gurney parallel to the table, lower both to the same height, carefully roll the body from one surface to the other. I positioned everything correctly, locked the gurney wheels, lowered the table, then I pulled back the sheet covering Robert Sinclair's body and prepared to make the transfer. That's when he exhaled, not a small release of trapped air, but a full, long breath. A deliberate exhalation that seemed to come from deep in his lungs, lasting maybe 3 or 4 seconds. The kind of breath you'd take before speaking. I froze. My hands were on his shoulder and hip, ready to roll him. I watched his chest, waiting to see if it would rise again, if somehow this man wasn't actually dead, if I'd made a catastrophic mistake in accepting a body that still had life in it. His chest didn't move. I checked for a pulse at his carotid artery. Nothing. His skin was cool, his jaw beginning to stiffen. He was definitely deceased. Had been for at least 8 hours by this point. Just trapped air, I told myself. Carbon dioxide built up in the lungs, released when I moved the body, happens all the time. Except it had never happened to me before. Not like that. Not so prolonged and deliberate. I took a breath myself, steadied my hands, and began the transfer. Rolled him carefully onto his back on the embalming table, adjusted his position, checked that everything was properly aligned. Then I heard it, one word, quiet but distinct, spoken in the empty preparation room. Ellis. My name, spoken in a voice I recognized, a voice I hadn't heard in 11 years, my father's voice. I stepped back from the table, my heart suddenly pounding. The preparation room was empty, except for me and the body. The ventilation system hummed, the fluorescent lights buzzed slightly, and I stood there, staring at Robert Sinclair's gray face, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. I hadn't imagined it. I knew that voice. I'd heard it every day for the first 18 years of my life. Heard it at holidays and birthdays until I was 22. Heard it for the last time, saying, "Love you, son," over a phone call 3 days before he had died of a heart attack. My father's voice, unmistakable and impossible, speaking my name in a mortuary preparation room from the throat of a stranger. I checked the room carefully, examined every corner, every piece of equipment. The door was closed. No one else in the building except my colleague Marcus, who was working in the office upstairs. The windows were sealed. There was no radio, no phone playing, no source for the voice except my own mind, or the body on my table. I approached Robert Sinclair again. His face was slack, expressionless, his mouth slightly open from the jaw beginning to drop. His eyes were closed, the lids showing the faint discoloration I'd need to correct with makeup. He looked like every other deceased I'd worked with, just a body, lifeless and still. "Hello?" I said quietly, feeling ridiculous, talking to a dead body, expecting a response. Nothing, just the hum of ventilation, the buzz of lights, my own breathing loud in the silence. I began the embalming process, standard procedure, arterial injection, cavity aspiration, feature setting. I've done this so many times it's nearly automatic. My hands knowing the motions, my mind focusing on the technical details. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that the body on my table was different somehow, that I was being watched or assessed or judged. Halfway through the process, while I was working on facial restoration, it happened again. A breath, long and slow, exhaled through Robert Sinclair's nose and mouth while I was literally holding his jaw, feeling the air move past my fingers. And with that breath, words. "You did well, son." My father's voice, clearer this time, unmistakable, the same tone he'd used when I graduated high school, when I got my mortuary license, when I'd accomplished something he was proud of. My hands were shaking. I stepped back, staring at the body. "This isn't real," I said aloud. "You're dead. He's dead. This is trapped air and my imagination and stress." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it, because the words weren't random. They were specific, personal, spoken in a voice that couldn't be coincidence or hallucination. I finished the embalming in silence, working as quickly as I could, while maintaining professional standards. Every few minutes, I'd glance at Robert Sinclair's face, expecting to see his eyes open or his mouth move, but he remained still, just a body undergoing the routine processes that would prepare him for viewing. When I was done, I covered him with a sheet and wheeled him to the refrigeration unit, logged the completion in my records, cleaned my equipment. All the normal post-procedure tasks performed with shaking hands and a mind that kept circling back to that voice. You did well, son. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? The body spoke to me in my dead father's voice, would get me referred for psychological evaluation, possibly suspended, so I said nothing, just finished my shift and went home, where I lay awake most of the night replaying those moments in my mind. The viewing for Robert Sinclair was scheduled for 3 days later. I did the final preparation that morning, dressed him in the suit his daughter provided, applied cosmetics to achieve a peaceful, natural appearance, positioned him in the casket. He looked good. My work was thorough and skillful. His daughter would see her father looking dignified and at rest. But as I was making the final adjustments, positioning his hands in the correct fold over his chest, I heard it one more time. Not words this time, just a sound, barely audible. My father's laugh, the quiet chuckle he'd make when he was pleased about something, that warm sound that had been part of the background of my childhood. It came from Robert Sinclair's body. I was certain of it. That brief, gentle laugh, escaping from lungs that hadn't drawn breath in 4 days. I've been researching since then, reading about post-mortem vocalizations, gas releases, the various sounds bodies can make. None of it explains what I heard. None of it accounts for the specificity. My name, the familiar tone, the laugh that belonged to someone who died 11 years ago. I've worked with 8 bodies since Robert Sinclair, all of them normal, all of them silent except for the expected releases of trapped air, no voices, no words, no sounds that could be mistaken for speech. But I can't stop thinking about it, about my father's voice coming from a stranger's throat, about those specific words, Ellis, and you did well, son. My father died suddenly. We'd talked on the phone 3 days before, a normal conversation about work and weather and family. He'd said, "Love you, son," at the end, and then he was gone. Heart attack at 62, found in his car in a parking lot. No warning, no goodbye, no chance to say the things you always think you'll have time for. And now, 11 years later, his voice speaks to me from the bodies I prepare. At least, it did once, with Robert Sinclair. And I don't know if it will happen again, or if that was the only time, the only message. You did well, son. Maybe it was my father. Maybe something about Robert Sinclair's body, some quality or condition or unknown factor, allowed my father to reach through for just a moment, to tell me something he didn't get to say before he died. Or maybe it was just trapped air and wishful thinking and the human mind's desperate need to find meaning in random events. But I don't think so. I've heard trapped air release 1,000 times. I know what it sounds like. This was different. This was deliberate. This was my father finding a way to speak to me one more time. I still work in the preparation room every day, still transfer bodies from gurney to table, still perform embalmings with care and professionalism. But now, every time I move a body, every time I hear that inevitable exhalation, I listen. I listen for a word, a phrase, a voice I haven't heard in 11 years. I listen for my father telling me it's okay, that he's proud, that death isn't the end of everything we were to each other. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between the hum of ventilation and the buzz of fluorescent lights, I think I hear him, not in words, just in the feeling that comes over me in that preparation room, the sense that I'm not entirely alone, that someone is watching me work with approval and love. You did well, son. I carry those words with me now. 4 words spoken in a voice that shouldn't exist anymore, coming from a body that had no connection to the man who raised me. 4 words that might have been nothing but trapped air and imagination, or might have been everything I needed to hear. I review security footage every morning, and for 96 days, camera 12 has shown me the same little girl walking backward out of frame at 3:12 a.m. My name is Morgan, and I'm the security systems technician for Valley View Mausoleum. It's not a typical security job. I don't guard in anything or patrol the grounds. I manage the digital surveillance system, review overnight footage, maintain the equipment, and flag any concerning activity for management. Mostly, that means watching time-lapse recordings of empty corridors and making sure nothing malfunctions. We have 16 cameras throughout the facility. Cameras 1 through 8 cover the public areas, entrances, chapels, offices. Cameras 9 through 16 monitor the crypt wings, the long marble corridors where the deceased are interred in wall vaults. Camera 12 is positioned at the west end of the east wing crypt corridor, angled to capture the entire length of the hallway. It's one of our older cameras, installed when the facility was built in 1998, but it still functions perfectly. Clear image, good low light performance, reliable recording. The anomaly started on January 9th. I came in that morning to review the previous night's footage. Standard procedure. I watched the recordings at 4 times speed, looking for anything unusual, motion in areas that should be still, lights that shouldn't be on, any indication of unauthorized access. At timestamp 0312 a.m., camera 12 showed movement. A little girl was walking down the east wing corridor. She looked to be maybe 7 or 8 years old, wearing a white dress that seemed to glow slightly in the emergency lighting. Her hair was long and dark, hanging loose past her shoulders. She was moving slowly down the hallway, and as I watched, she stopped in front of Crypt 89, placed her hand flat against the brass facing, held it there for several seconds, then began walking backward, not turning around and walking normally, walking backward, her feet moving in reverse, her body gliding smoothly down the corridor, her face toward the camera the entire time. Her expression was blank, emotionless, just a child's face staring directly at the lens. She backed all the way to the end of the corridor, then backward out of frame. The timestamp read 0314 when she disappeared. I rewound and watched it again. Same thing, little girl, white dress, walking down the corridor, stopping at crypt 89, placing her hand against it, then walking backward out of frame, maintaining eye contact with the camera. I checked the other cameras. None of them showed her entering the building. None showed her in any other corridor or room. Just that 2-minute appearance on camera 12 from 3:12 to 3:14 a.m. I filed a report with management, included the video clip, noted the timestamp, suggested we check the facility's access points for security breaches. Management reviewed it and had a reasonable explanation. A relative visiting at night, perhaps with permission from staff I hadn't been informed about. The mausoleum sometimes allowed special after-hours visits for families who couldn't come during regular hours. They'd check the records and get back to me. But the next morning, when I reviewed the footage, she was there again. Same time, 3:12 a.m., same hallway, same white dress, same slow walk to crypt 89, hand placed flat against the brass, then walking backward out of frame while staring at the camera. Identical, frame by frame. It looked like the exact same recording, but the timestamp was different. January 10th instead of January 9th, and the timestamp on the building's other cameras confirmed this was new footage, not a glitch or accidental repeat. This time, management took it more seriously. They had the security company check camera 12 for malfunctions, examined the footage for signs of digital manipulation, reviewed access logs. Everything checked out. The camera was functioning normally. The footage was genuine, not edited or corrupted, and no one had accessed the building after hours on either night. But she kept appearing every night, same time, same action. Walk to crypt 89, place hand against it, walk backward out of frame. Always the same, like a recording playing on loop, except it was new footage each time. After a week, I started documenting it systematically, made note of any variations, any changes in the girl's appearance or behavior. There were none. It was exactly the same every time, down to the way her hair fell, the position of her hand on the crypt, the blank expression on her face. The only thing that changed was the timestamp. January 9th, January 10th, January 11th, on, every single night. I researched Crypt 89. It belonged to a woman named Claire Dennison, who'd been interred in 2011 at age 34. Cause of death, car accident. I pulled the records. She'd been survived by a husband and one daughter. The daughter's name was Emily. Age listed at time of interment, 7 years old. I stared at that record for a long time, 7 years old in 2011, which would make her 20 years old now, in 2025, not a child anymore. But the girl on camera 12 looked exactly 7, the same age Emily would have been when her mother died. I kept watching the footage every morning, kept seeing that same little girl walk backward down the corridor, her face toward the camera, her expression empty. And I noticed something I'd missed before. Her eyes. In the low-resolution footage, at 4 times speed, I'd thought she was just staring at the camera, but when I slowed it down, watched at normal speed, I could see her eyes moving. She wasn't staring at the camera, she was tracking something. Her gaze followed a path from the crypt, down the corridor, all the way to the camera position, as if she was watching something move toward her while she walked backward away from it. Something I couldn't see, something that didn't appear on any camera. I started staying late, positioning myself at camera 12's location at 3:10 a.m., waiting to see if I could observe anything in person. The east wing was cold at that hour, the marble floors gleaming dully in the emergency lighting, the brass facings on the crypts reflecting dim glimmers. I stood there, holding my tablet, watching camera 12's live feed, while simultaneously looking down the actual corridor. At 3:12, she appeared on the tablet screen, walking down the hallway toward Crypt 89. But when I looked up from the screen, the corridor was empty. No little girl, no movement, just empty hallway. I looked back at the tablet. There she was, clear as day, placing her hand on Crypt 89. I looked up. Nothing. She walked backward on the screen, her face directed at where I was standing, walking toward me, getting closer, but the physical corridor remained empty. I kept switching my gaze between the screen and the hallway. On screen, she was 10 feet away, 5 feet, right in front of me, so close I should be able to touch her. Nothing. Just cold air and empty space. On the screen, she walked backward past the camera's position and out of frame. The timestamp read 3:14. The corridor was silent and still. I've tried and everything since then to stop the footage or explain it. Had the camera replaced? The new camera shows the same thing. Had an electrician check for interference, found nothing. Had a tech company examine the digital system. Everything's working perfectly. The footage is real, not a glitch, not a corruption, not a malfunction. Every night at 3:12, camera 12 records a little girl in a white dress walking backward through our east wing. But she's not there, not physically. When I stand in that corridor, when I look with my own eyes, there's nothing. Just on camera. Only on camera. A ghost caught on surveillance, but invisible to human sight. I researched Emily Dennison, Claire's daughter, found her social media profiles. She's 20 years old now, attending college in another state, living a normal life. I didn't contact her. How could I? Your dead mother's mausoleum shows footage of you as a child visiting her crypt at 3 a.m. every night. But I wonder if she knows, if she dreams about it, if some part of her, some fragment from when she was 7 years old and her mother had just died, returns to that crypt every night at 3:12. Walking backward away from something, something that moves down that corridor toward her, something I can't see. Today is day 96. I'll come in tomorrow morning, review the footage, and she'll be there. 3:12 a.m., walking down the corridor, stopping at Crypt 89, placing her hand against her mother's vault. Then walking backward, her face toward the camera, her eyes tracking something invisible that follows her down the hallway. I've stopped trying to explain it, stopped trying to fix it or prevent it. This is just what camera 12 shows now. Every night, a little girl visiting her mother, a moment frozen in time, playing out endlessly in digital memory. The footage is always from 2 nights prior. I don't know why. When I review footage on January 9th, it shows the girl from January 7th. On January 10th, she appears from January 8th. Always 2 days behind, always the same action, always 3:12 a.m. I wonder what would happen if I went to the East Wing tonight at 3:12. If I stood in that corridor and watched the empty space where the camera shows her walking, would I see nothing like I have before? Or has the delay been counting down, narrowing the gap between the recorded past and the present moment? What happens when the footage catches up to real time? When camera 12 shows tonight's girl, not the girl from 2 nights ago, what happens when past and present occupy the same space? I don't know if I want to find out, but tomorrow morning I'll review the footage. I'll watch that little girl walk backward away from her mother's crypt, her eyes tracking something I can't see, and I'll count the days. 96 so far. How many more until the footage catches up? How many more until I'm standing in that corridor when camera 12 shows now instead of then? How many more until I can finally see what she's been walking backward away from all this time? The smell came back 6 times, and now I see her in the rearview mirror, sitting where no one should be. My name is Marco, and I've been driving hearses for Sterling Funeral Services for 7 years. It's specialized work, not just driving, but understanding protocol, maintaining the vehicle's dignity, treating each transport with the solemnity it deserves. I take pride in my work, keep my hearse immaculate, arrive early for every service. At least, I did. Before the smell started, it began. In late February, after a routine transport from County Medical Center to Riverside Funeral Home, elderly woman, natural death, nothing unusual about the pickup or delivery. I completed the transport without incident, cleaned the back cabin as I always do, and parked the hearse in the facility garage for the night. The next morning, I opened the back door to load flowers for a service and was hit with a smell so strong I actually staggered backward. Jasmine. Heavy, almost cloying, the kind of perfume women wore in the 50s or 60s, mixed with something else underneath, something sweet and slightly rotten, like flowers left too long in a vase. The smell was overwhelming, filling the entire cabin. I spent 3 hours cleaning that day. Vacuumed, shampooed the carpets, wiped down every surface, aired out the cabin. The smell faded to almost nothing. By the next morning, it was back, stronger than before. I had the hearse professionally detailed. They shampooed everything, used enzyme cleaners to break down organic matter, treated the ventilation system. The detail shop manager assured me nothing could survive their process. The smell returned within 24 hours. Over the next month, I had the hearse detailed 6 times. Different shops, different methods. One place even removed and replaced the carpet. Another disassembled parts of the ventilation system, looking for the source. Everyone found the same thing. Nothing. No dead animals, no mold, no mechanical issues that would produce odor. But the smell persisted. That heavy jasmine fragrance mixed with something rotten underneath. Some days it was faint, almost ignorable. Other days It was so strong I had to drive with the windows down, even in March cold. My supervisor suggested I switch vehicles. We have 3 hearses in the fleet. I could take one of the others, let mechanics examine mine, but it wasn't a mechanical problem. I knew that somehow. This was something else. The silhouette appeared in April. I was making a late night transport from the hospital to the mortuary. Just me on dark roads, streetlights sparse, the back cabin empty, except for a deceased I'd just picked up. I glanced in my rearview mirror, habit, checking the cabin, and saw something in the back. A silhouette, dark against the lighter interior, the shape of someone sitting upright in the casket bay, where I'd just secured a body bag on the stretcher. I hit the brakes, pulled over, my heart pounding, turned on the interior lights, and looked back through the partition window. Nothing. Just the stretcher, the secured body bag, empty space. I convinced myself it was shadows, fatigue, the stress of dealing with the smell for 2 months. I completed the transport, tried not to look in the mirror, but I saw it again 2 nights later. Same thing, a silhouette in the back cabin, sitting upright, head slightly tilted as if listening to something. I started seeing it regularly after that. Maybe 1 out of every 3 transports, I'd glance in the mirror and see that dark shape. Sometimes it was sitting, sometimes it seemed to be standing, bent slightly under the cabin's low ceiling. Once, I could swear it was leaning forward, as if trying to see out the partition window, as if trying to look at me. Each time, when I'd pull over and check, there was nothing, just whatever deceased I was transporting, properly secured, everything in order. My predecessor quit this route after 3 months. I found this out from another driver, casually mentioned in conversation. Yeah, Marco, you've lasted way longer than Jenkins. He couldn't hack it. What happened? The driver shrugged, said he kept smelling something weird, said the hearse was haunted. Management thought he was cracking under the stress. Did he say what he smelled? Perfume, I think. Old lady perfume. I felt cold. Jasmine? The driver looked at me. Yeah, how'd you know? I started researching the hearse's history. It's a 2015 Cadillac XTS, purchased new by Sterling. But I wanted to know what transports it had done in its first few years, before I started driving it. I found the logs, hundreds of transports, mostly routine, but one entry stood out. August 2016, name marked as Laura Vasquez, age 47. Notes in the margin indicated difficult removal and extended transport time. I asked older staff about Laura Vasquez. Most didn't remember her specifically. We handle hundreds of deceased every year, but one funeral director, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with Sterling for 20 years, remembered. Vasquez. God, yes, that was a nightmare case. Woman died alone in her apartment, wasn't discovered for almost a week in August heat. We had to do extensive restoration, and even then, the smell. She shook her head. We never got it completely out of anything that touched that case. What kind of smell? Decomposition, obviously, but there was also her perfume. She must have worn it every day. The apartment reeked of it. Jasmine something. It was so strong it soaked into everything. The gurney, the body bag, The hearse Jenkins was driving at the time. The hearse I'm driving now. Patricia nodded slowly. Yeah, that would be the one. What happened to her? Did she have family? No one. Completely alone. No relatives came forward. The county handled the burial. I remember the funeral director saying it was one of the saddest cases he'd ever handled. A woman who died alone, lay there for a week, and had no one who cared enough to claim her body. I thought about that. Laura Vasquez, alone in life and death. Her last transport in a hearse that still carried her smell 9 years later. The silhouette became clearer after I learned her name. Not physically clearer. I still couldn't see features or details, but more persistent, more present. I started talking to it, to her. On long night drives, when I was alone with the body in the back, I'd speak quietly. I'm sorry you were alone. I'm sorry no one came for you. I'm sorry it took so long for someone to find you. The silhouette would appear in my mirror when I said these things. Just sitting there, that head tilt position, as if listening. Last week, something changed. I was making a transport around 2 a.m., talking to the mirror as I'd gotten into the habit of doing. The smell was particularly strong that night, jasmine and rot, almost overwhelming despite the open windows. Laura, I said, if that's you, if you're still here somehow, I want you to know you weren't forgotten. I remember you. I know your name. The silhouette appeared in the mirror, but this time it was leaning forward. Not just slightly, fully forward, as if pressing against the partition window, trying to get closer to the front cabin. I should have been terrified, should have pulled over, fled the vehicle, refused to drive it ever again. But I wasn't scared. I felt something else, sadness. Overwhelming sadness for a woman who died alone and stayed alone, trapped somehow in the vehicle that had carried her body to an unclaimed burial. I see you, I said. I know you're there. The silhouette remained. In the mirror, I could see it more clearly than ever before. Not features exactly, but the suggestion of them, the outline of shoulders, a head, what might have been hair hanging long, and the position, leaning forward, reaching toward the front cabin, toward me. I drove the rest of the route with that presence behind me. When I delivered the body and opened the back cabin, the smell was so strong I nearly vomited. But there was nothing visible, just empty space where the silhouette had been. I've stopped trying to get rid of the smell. What's the point? It's been 9 years, 6 detail jobs, 1 carpet replacement. The smell isn't coming from anything physical. It's coming from Laura Vasquez, who rode in this hearse for her last journey and somehow never left. The silhouette appears almost every transport now, always in the same position, leaning forward, that slight head tilt, as if listening to me talk. Because I do talk. Every drive, I talk to Laura, tell her about my day, tell her she's not alone anymore, tell her someone remembers. I don't know if it helps, if she can hear me, if she's even conscious in any way we'd recognize. But the other drivers won't use this hearse. They request the other vehicles, make excuses, claim this one handles poorly or has mechanical issues. Only I drive it now. Only I drive, with Laura Vasquez's ghost sitting in the back cabin, surrounded by her jasmine perfume and the smell of death that clung to her in those final days. Only I make transports while talking to the mirror, keeping company with a woman who died alone and refuses to be alone in death. The silhouette is there now. I can see it in my rearview mirror as I write this, sitting in the empty cabin during my lunch break. Just a shadow, a suggestion of presence, that slight head tilt that I've come to recognize as her posture. I see you, Laura, I say quietly. I see you. And in the mirror, the silhouette shifts, just slightly. What might be acknowledgement? What might be gratitude? What might be a woman who died alone, finally being seen? Her hands moved while I was closing the service, and when I checked the sign-in book, she'd written her own name. My name is Khalid, and I'm the assistant director at Green Hill Funeral Home. I handle the operational details of services, coordinating with families, managing logistics, ensuring everything runs smoothly from arrangement to interment. After 15 years in this profession, I've developed a routine, a rhythm to the work that helps me maintain composure even during the most difficult services. Mrs. Beatrice Walsh's service was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in late March. She was 72, died unexpectedly from a stroke. Her family described her as vibrant and active right until the end. She'd been gardening the day before she collapsed. No warning, no chance to prepare. The viewing was at 2 p.m., burial to follow at 4. I arrived early to make final preparations, adjusted the lighting, confirmed the flower arrangements, checked that the casket was properly positioned. Everything was in order. Mrs. Walsh looked peaceful. Our staff had done excellent work with her preparation. She was dressed in a blue suit her daughter had selected, her hands folded over her chest, a small gold cross clasped between her fingers. The family had specifically requested that position, hands folded, cross visible. The viewing proceeded normally. About 60 people attended, a steady stream of friends and relatives paying their respects. I stood in my usual position near the chapel entrance, available if needed, but unobtrusive. The family was handling their grief as well as could be expected. At 4:15, after the final prayer and just before we were to close the casket for transport to the cemetery, I did my last walkthrough, made sure programs were collected, flowers arranged for transport, the family's personal items gathered. Everything was proceeding according to schedule. That's when I noticed Mrs. Walsh's hands had moved. Not dramatically, but definitely moved. They were no longer folded over her chest. Instead, they were resting at her sides, palms down on the casket lining, fingers slightly curled. The cross that had been between her folded hands was now lying on her abdomen. I felt my stomach drop. In 15 years, I've never had a body shift position this significantly. Arms might slide slightly as rigidity fades, hands might separate a little, but this was different, a complete repositioning from folded at chest level to straight at sides. I glanced around the chapel. The family was in the viewing room. No one had been near the casket in the last 20 minutes. I'd been watching the entrance. No one could have approached and moved her hands without me seeing. I approached the casket and carefully repositioned her hands, folded them back over her chest, replaced the cross between her fingers. The body felt normal, cool, rigid, as expected. I checked for any sign of why the position had shifted, found nothing. Maybe I'd been mistaken about the original position. Maybe in the stress and activity of the service, I'd misremembered how we'd arranged her hands. It was possible. I dismissed it and returned to managing the logistics. The family was ready. Time to close the casket and proceed to the cemetery. But before we closed it, Mrs. Walsh's daughter Emma asked if she could have one more private moment. Standard request. I gave her space, moving to the back of the chapel. I watched Emma approach the casket, lean over her mother, and after a moment, carefully adjust something. When she stepped back, I could see she'd repositioned Mrs. Walsh's hands again. The daughter noticed the change too. Did someone move her hands? Emma asked, her voice strained. They may have shifted slightly, I said carefully. It can happen. We specifically wanted them folded. That's how they were when I saw her this morning. I know. I'll make sure they stay that way. I approached the casket once more. Mrs. Walsh's hands were at her sides again, palms down. The exact position I'd found them in before, as if she'd moved them book the moment I'd walked away. This time, I secured them. Used the positioning blocks we keep for difficult cases, small cushions that hold limbs in place. Positioned her hands carefully, folded over her chest, crossed between her fingers, then gently secured everything with the blocks. Emma nodded her approval. We closed the casket, secured it for transport, loaded it into the hearse. The burial service at the cemetery was brief. Family and friends gathered around the grave. The minister spoke, prayers were said, standard graveside service, nothing unusual. After everyone had left, and the grounds crew was preparing to lower the casket, I returned to the funeral home to handle post-service paperwork. Part of my routine is reviewing the sign-in book, making note of who attended for our records and for the family's thank you cards. I opened the book to Mrs. Walsh's page. The entries were typical: names, relationships, brief messages of condolence. About 40 people had signed. The last entry made my hands go cold. The signature at the bottom of the page, in shaky but deliberate handwriting, read, "I wasn't ready," and the name signed below it, Beatrice Walsh. I stared at it, checked the earlier entries. None of them were in the same handwriting. This signature was distinct, written in an elderly person's script, the letters wavering but clear. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it that morning on the intake forms when Mrs. Walsh's daughter had brought personal effects. Emma had included a birthday card her mother had written 2 weeks before her death. Love, Mom, signed in that same shaky script. Beatrice Walsh had signed her own guest book. After her death, sometime during the service, between when I'd reviewed the book that morning and now, she'd written her name and a message. I wasn't ready. I checked the security footage. Have cameras covering the chapel entrance and the general interior. I reviewed the entire service, watching at double speed. No one approached the guest book stand after the initial viewing period. The book sat untouched in its position near the entrance. No movement, no hands reaching to write, just the book, static and still, but somehow, between the morning when I'd placed the blank book there and the evening when I reviewed it, that final entry had appeared. I called Emma Walsh. I didn't tell her about the signature. How could I? But I asked about her mother's state of mind before her death. Was your mother, was she content? At peace with her life? Emma was quiet for a moment. Why are you asking? Just standard follow up, making sure we handled everything appropriately. My mother was in the middle of everything when she died, Emma said. She had travel plans for the summer. She was planning my daughter's graduation party. She'd just started a new garden bed in the backyard. The day before her stroke, she told me she felt like she was finally getting to do all the things she'd put off. She said she felt young again. I wasn't ready. Those words in Beatrice Walsh's handwriting, appearing in a book that no one had touched. I've been researching since then, reading about deathbed phenomena, the dying process, the psychological aspects of sudden death. Found some interesting material about unfinished business, the theory that people who die unexpectedly, with goals incomplete, might resist the transition somehow. But theories don't explain handwriting appearing in a guest book. They don't explain hands that won't stay in position. They don't explain a signature that shouldn't exist. I returned to the cemetery yesterday, stood at Mrs. Walsh's grave, now covered with fresh sod, a temporary marker in place until the headstone is ready. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I'm sorry you didn't get to finish everything you planned. I'm sorry you weren't ready. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees. Probably just coincidence. Probably just weather. But I felt something, a sense of acknowledgement, of being heard. I've been doing this work for 15 years. I've conducted hundreds of services, helped hundreds of families navigate their grief. I've always believed that death, while sad, was natural, that people passed away when their time came. But Beatrice Walsh has taught me something different, that some deaths come too soon, that some people aren't ready, aren't finished, aren't willing to let go of the life they were still living. Her hands moved because she moved them, fighting against the stillness we imposed, the positioning we chose, trying to maintain some autonomy over her own body, even in death. Her signature appeared because she wrote it, somehow, through means I don't understand, and probably never will. She found a way to hold a pen and sign her name one last time, to leave a message that couldn't be ignored. I wasn't ready. 3 words that explain everything and nothing, a statement of fact, a protest, a final assertion of identity from a woman who'd been alive and vibrant one day and dead the next, with no transition, no preparation, no time to say goodbye. I still have the guest book. I've kept it separate from the family's copy, which I edited before sending to Emma. She doesn't need to see her mother's impossible signature. She doesn't need to carry that weight. But I look at it sometimes, late at night in my office, read through the names of people who attended, read the messages of sympathy and love, and then I read that final entry in handwriting I know belongs to a woman who was dead when she wrote it. I wasn't ready. None of us are, I think. None of us are ever truly ready for death. We imagine we will be, that when our time comes, we'll accept it gracefully. But Beatrice Walsh has shown me the truth. that death can come when we're in the middle of everything, when we have plans and hopes and unfinished business, when we're still fully engaged with life. And sometimes, when death comes, that suddenly some part of us refuses to accept it, refuses to be positioned and displayed and buried according to others' preferences, refuses to go quietly into whatever comes next. Some part of us fights back. Some part of us reaches for a pen. Some part of us writes the truth. I wasn't ready, and neither am I, Mrs. Walsh, neither am I.